Hello and welcome to the 250th episode of the Weekly Stuff Podcast.
That's too many episodes, Jonathan. It's been too many episodes for too long, is how it feels like.
I'm Jonathan Lack.
I'm Sean Chapman.
And we are here for the too manyth time, I guess.
Yes.
But yes, 250. That's a lot of episodes, Sean.
It's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
We're recording this a little out of order. This is not the 250th one we've recorded.
Yeah, so it doesn't feel real yet. I'm sure once we get to the point that this episode will release, it will feel like, oh, fuck, we did 250 of these.
Yeah, I can't really tell, honestly, the difference between a 248 and a 250 just in the recording. But yes, this is episode 250. About a year ago, we had episode 200, where we revisited our very first podcast, under this title at least, where we did our top 10 movies of all time. We redid it for episode 200. That was a lot of fun.
Yep.
So for 250, I think the natural thing we knew we now had to do is to revisit our top 10 video games of all time, a topic that is frankly even more relevant maybe to the general week-to-week discussions of this podcast.
Yeah.
Because we talk video games pretty much every week. We do not talk art house films every week.
No, yes, it's not, every week is not like Once Upon a Time in the West or Harakiri or something.
You're right. No. Although that'd be fun too. But yes, we talk a lot of video games. The last time we did this was 2013. I forget what episode. It was in the 30s somewhere.
Yeah, I can tell you we did 3 episodes spanning from July 8th to July 22nd.
Yes, I think I was out of town, and so we recorded it as 3 parts, and then I used it for the whole break I was on.
Yeah.
This one's going to be 2 parts, so this is going to be episode 250 and 251 next week. But yes, we are redoing our top 10 favorite video games of all time. I have a top 10 list. You have a top 10 list.
Yes. I don't know what your list is, and you don't know what my list is. We've not talked about them at all.
We have not, and I'm actually super curious because I know, just like with the movies, these 5 years have been very formative. They've been a very active time in the video game industry. I mean, the last time we did this, the PS4 wasn't a system yet.
Yeah, it was like right on the eve of the PS4 coming out. It was like a month after Last of Us released.
Right. So it's been a while. Last week we talked about The Last of Us on this show, which was really fun.
Yes, in the order that the podcasts are coming out, that is true.
You're telling them how the sausage is made, Sean. Don't do it.
We've been recording lots of weird random episodes at times when we can.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was like a 5-year revisitation. This is a 5-year revisitation. We're going to go over our old lists, see what's changed. We're going to obviously give you our new lists. We're going to hear from a couple of you because I put out a call, like, what are your favorite video games? I had a couple interesting answers, so I want to get over some of those.
One answer was the best, but...
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Well, that was maybe a co-host's answer. And I have some other questions. So before we dive into things, Sean, let's go over... what were our 2013 lists? Why don't we start there?
Okay.
Because this is... You have yours, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I had to... Because this was like with the movie one. It was like 2 computers ago, and I had no idea where the files were. Although we eventually rediscovered the movie list I had on an old Google Doc that was untitled that we found when we were coordinating our, like, trying to test how to do remote recordings of podcasts. So that was a fun discovery. No idea where my original list is that I wrote. So I had to go back and re-listen to, and kind of skip through, because I was going to listen to, like, fucking 4 hours of podcasts straight through of just us talking about shit. But had to reconstruct my list that way and rediscovered some gems of conversations that I had basically forgotten about.
Some conversations were good. Some were awkward, you know.
Yes.
We'll get to one of them. All right. So in 2013, I'll do mine first.
Okay.
My top 10 were number 10, Minecraft. Number 9, Red Dead Redemption. Number 8, Portal 2. Number 7, Batman Arkham City. Number 6, Bioshock Infinite. And number 5, The Last of Us. So 2 games that had just come out.
Yes.
Number 4, Mario 64. Number 3, Halo Reach. Number 2, Mass Effect 2. And number 1 was Persona 4. I had not played Persona 3 yet.
No, yes, I have a note here on mine saying that you had not finished Persona 3. You specifically said that you were like halfway through it or something.
I was, I think, yeah. So I had not played. It was not on my list yet. That's a weird list. I like all of those games.
Yeah, no, those are all good games.
Some of those I have not played since making that list, like Portal 2 or something. Red Dead would be nowhere near that for me now because that game is impossible to go back to. But yeah, that's an interesting list. Do you want to make fun of me for the bandolier thing one last time?
I mean, that was one of my favorite things about re-listening to that podcast was rediscovering, that's how far back it goes. It goes back 5+ years of you not knowing how to play video games. We relitigated that whole issue on the Last of Us podcast.
We did. And there is another Red Dead coming out this year, so I'm sure we will have no end of discussion of that. But yes.
I mean, I don't even know if you can buy items in the new Red Dead Redemption 2 or bandoliers. I don't know if those exist in that universe yet. It's a prequel, so they hadn't invented it.
And I'll tell you guys, when we did the movies list, I had 0 crossover between my 2012 in that case and 2017 lists. I have 3 basically games crossing over to the new list, but 7 of those I just read are not here anymore.
Yes, yeah, that's an interesting list. It's very late, weighted to very recent games.
Yeah.
In that instance, and because that was right after you finished Persona 4, right? It must have been immediately. Not to say that is in any way a wrong choice.
No.
Yeah, it's just interesting to put it in context of how we're playing games. So I'll go over my old list. My number 10 was Journey. My number 9 was StarCraft. My number 8 was Half-Life 1. My number 7 was Red Dead Redemption. My number 6 was Halo 3. My number 5 was Ocarina of Time. I also have a note here saying that Jonathan called Ocarina of Time boring in that conversation.
I did?
Yes, and it was very frustrating.
I'm so
and
sorry.
Because this was before you had your Zelda Awakening or whatever the fuck.
Zelda's one of my favorite series now.
Yes.
I fucking love Ocarina of Time is one of the greatest games ever made.
Yes, but this is 2013 and you made fun of Ocarina of Time.
I am so sorry.
I'm never going to forgive you for it now that I've relearned that.
That was a different me.
It was a different you, but it was still you, and you have to pay for the sins of the past. My number 4 was Persona 4. My number 3 was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. In that conversation, you said that you needed to play that game, and I have a note here saying that you still have not played that game.
I got further in it than I ever have when they put it out on Xbox One backwards.
Played an hour of it or something.
I played 2 or 3 hours.
Okay, yes, 2 or 3 hours of a 30-hour RPG.
Yeah.
And then my number 2 was the Mass Effect Trilogy, which I defended that on the back of they had just released the PS3, Xbox 360 pack of all 3 of those games, and that's how I defended making a choice I would not defend today of putting an entire trilogy in one spot instead of just one game.
Oh, you're gonna hate my list.
It's unforgivable. You can't. It's wimping out. It's the choice of the wimp. You gotta pick one. And then my number 1 was Persona 3 FES, and again my note says you had not finished it at that point.
I have now.
Yes, you have
multiple times. Interesting list. I think your list was better than mine.
Yeah, I have there are a bunch of these games. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games on here are not on my new list.
Okay.
And a part of that
similar ratio.
Yeah, part of that is kind of because I have. We can go over this now. My methodology for creating the list this time was no multiple games from one franchise. I just couldn't because. Obviously, with something like Mass Effect and Persona and those kinds of games, that's these trilogies of games or series of games, or Halo's another one that's very hard to pick one. And my heart of hearts, Halo 3, Halo 1, Persona 3, 4, and 5 would all be on here, and that's 5 games.
It is
for 2 franchises, right? So,
well, for me, for reference, because yes, I used the same methodology. I was not as strict about I have a couple of. Well, I have one entry that's a kind of a cheat, but you'll see. But I did, each entry, there's no series has more than one entry, right? So I picked, if a Persona is on my list, you guys will find out. There's only one of them. But yes, obviously, Persona 3, 4, 5 would be on mine. I would have 4 or 5 Zelda games, if I'm being honest, because I think that series might have the highest batting average of any series I've ever played. I would probably have multiple Marios. But then you're talking about a top 30 list, and it's not fair.
And so, and it's not, because one thing I do like for these lists is to represent a certain breadth of games instead of it just being a bunch from one series because you love Persona so much. And so in any case where there, and we'll note this on my list when we get to them, but of games where it's there's a whole franchise I love that this one game is representing, it is representing that entire franchise realistically on the list. They're all kind of subheadings under that where it is on the list.
And I kind of weighted them that way as well a little bit, So yes, I think that's a good way to do it. The equivalent on films for this, for me, was 1 film per director, you know? Of my number 1 film of all time was Spirited Away. I could have made a top 10 of mostly Hayao Miyazaki films,
right?
But that would feel kind of reductive, right?
Exactly. Or having 4 Kurosawa movies on the list. It's just it's just a boring list at that point. This is a boring podcast to do.
Yes. And I'm not going to tell you that the 10 greatest films of all time were made by one guy, right?
Yeah.
So, exactly. Same thing here. So, yes, before we get into the lists, I have one fun question I want to ask, Sean.
Okay.
I think we've filled in a lot of gaps in our gaming knowledge since 2013, going back and playing older games. There's obviously been a lot of new games since then that a couple might show up on here. I actually don't remember if I have it. I have one, I think. But, yeah, so there are still, though, we have not played every game ever made.
No, not even close.
What are great games, like games that have a great reputation, that you have not played, that you think you would love, that you still want to fill in your knowledge gaps?
Jeez.
I have a couple.
Yeah, like I it's hard to come up with any off the top of my, because that's something I have been doing steadily,
right?
Kind of like since this podcast 2013. Really, going back and playing games like Resident Evil 4 was one, Doom was one. I don't think I'd finished Doom by the time we did that podcast, like the original Doom.
Right.
There's like Shenmue is a big one, like some of those.
Yeah, and for me too, I've filled in a lot of those. Zelda was a big gap for me. I've played pretty much every significant Zelda game, other than I think Skyward Sword. So but the three for me that I zeroed in on, and these are the three biggest ones I think in my knowledge still. Final Fantasy VI/3.
Yeah.
I have never played that to completion. I've played a little bit of it.
Yeah, I've never finished that one either.
Yeah, I feel like that's one I should play. Resident Evil 4. Is one I've never played.
Such a good game.
I do still have the Wii version of that, which, you can use the Wiimote. I like that kind of control scheme. Maybe I'll play it like that at some point. And Chrono Trigger. So two, Super NES era RPGs. Yeah. I've filled in a lot of other ones. I've really, I think, made a good attempt at playing a lot of the significant Super NES games. There's a couple left over, but earlier this year I played the entire Donkey Kong Country trilogy. I was happy to finally do that. But those are three for me that kind of come to mind of, I want to have the time to play those.
Yeah.
Now, sadly, at least two of those are giant, massive, long RPGs.
Uh-huh.
Resident Evil 4 I don't think is that long, but...
It's a decent-sized game, but no, it's not. It's not a Final Fantasy length. Yeah, for me, it's interesting, because I think, for me, what's different is I'm not as attracted to the, old, Super Nintendo era games. I have a big respect for a lot of them and love some of those games, but, I'll just say this right now because I don't think it's some sort of huge spoiler. There's only one game on my list before the year 2000. Because that's just where my tastes have always gone and I think it's something that's very true of video games and will also be very apparent on my list is that I think in a lot of ways, particularly the major AAA games are getting better all the time, and then the indie space is getting more interesting all the time, and it feels like we're still carving out this new kind of uncharted territory in video games in a way that movies are not really quite that. The movies were there for a little bit with digital effects, and kind of feels like that's maybe not even this carving out a new thing anymore.
Yeah, I do not have a Super NES game on my top 10. I really wish I did.
I'm legitimately surprised by that.
It's just, you'll see why. It's the franchise thing of the franchise pile up. And it's not, because I really do think there's something to be said for my comparison I've always made of I think the Super NES era is sort of late silent films.
Yes.
It is the height of a certain kind of artistry. Then we had to kind of go back for a while, and there are some obviously standouts in the late 90s, early 2000s, but fewer than we have now, for instance, with 3D games, right? It took a while to get back. Just like with sound films. There are some early great sound films, but most of them you would never want to fucking watch. Just like most early 3D games you would never want to fucking play. So, I think we come in waves. We're certainly on the crest of a wave right now, I think, in terms of video game artistry. But so those are some answers for me.
Here's a good one. Because I did play it quite a bit when it came out, but never quite, felt like I got it. I would love to go back and play Metroid Prime at some point.
Okay.
That's one that feels like I would want to give that another shot.
I think you would like that game, and we might talk about it later.
Okay.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? It might pop up.
It might pop up. What's the worst game you've ever played?
Fuck.
Sonic
the Hedgehog 2006.
Okay.
Easy. Yeah.
Sonic 06 still?
It took me a second to remember what was my answer the last time I answered that question. It was Sonic 2006. Nothing has changed since then. I have avoided playing games like that since then.
Honestly, my answer is probably the same, and I don't think I ever got out of that little fucking town you start in. So
I fucking finished that game.
Yeah, I know.
The year of my life.
I just wanted to pick on Sonic 06 while we're here, because a lot of things have changed since 2013. That is still the worst game we've ever played.
Yeah. But it's a lot harder to play a really bad game than it is to see a really bad movie.
That is true.
It's you have to put so much money and effort into it You have to really go out of your way, particularly at this moment in time, to play just a god-awful video game. Not like a controversial game that some people love, some people hate. A game that just everybody despises. It's hard to stumble into that now.
It is. I don't think in the PS4 generation I have paid for a game that I truly despised. There are games I've been disappointed in, like a Watch Dogs or something.
Yeah.
But, I'm not going to say Watch Dogs is like an F, horrible, worst game ever. It's fine.
No, yeah,
it's
there
totally
are
fine.
parts of that game that are very enjoyable. There are parts of that game that are really bad, but yes. Yeah.
Oh, I do have one other that I do think, in terms of games I have not played. But this one I'm going to be filling in about a month here, which is Shenmue.
Yes.
And Shenmue is coming out on the PS4 with Shenmue 2. I've got it pre-ordered, so I'm like, that one is covered. I will be playing Shenmue, and I am excited for that.
Shenmue had been one of the biggest ones I'd wanted to go back to a long time, and then I went back to it, and it's very good, and I like Shenmue.
Yeah, we'll find out how much you like Shenmue. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I haven't seen your list.
No.
All right, so I think we've gotten most of the front matter out of the way. On Twitter, I did put out a question of what are your favorite video games. Got a couple answers. Jamie said Mass Effect 3. Said it's the most ambitious sci-fi game that exists, showing the scale of the Reaper invasion, concluding the story arcs of all these interesting species, massive cast of characters. Shout out to the Citadel DLC he really likes. So we like Mass Effect 3.
Yes.
We might talk about Mass Effect today.
It might come up.
Levi said Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask because of its aesthetic and music and experimental storytelling. Loved the time constraints, planning things out to fight the clock. I thought this was an interesting comment. It also ruined the standard Ganon antagonist Zelda games for me because this and Link's Awakening were my first. And I'm like, that would bias you in a very weird way against that series because those are the two weirdest Zelda games.
Yes, yeah, the ones that break the mold by far.
Makes me think there must be someone out there who started with Zelda 2 and loved it as a kid on the NES and has never liked Zelda because none of them are like that.
And they try every single new Zelda game being like, this will be the one where they realize where they had gone wrong after Zelda 2, and it's like it never is. Maybe that's what they do next. Maybe how Breath of the Wild felt like it kind of brought back some elements of the original Legend of Zelda. Maybe now they're like, fuck it, side-scrolling, pseudo, top-down RPG thing. Let's do it, guys.
We had comments over on Facebook for KOTOR 1 and 2. And
those games might come up, who knows?
Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So those were good. And then I think the best comment was on Twitter. This person said, my favorite game is Cap'n Crunch's Crunchling Adventure. The joy of raising a small Crunchling into an Olympic-level athlete capable of crushing the dastardly Crunchium thieves in 3 extreme sports competitions has never been surpassed, in my humble opinion. And this person is Sean Chapman.
Yeah, I don't know if you should have. Now you just spoiled the top of my list.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I still have 9 other games to talk about.
That's true.
Yeah.
Sean, is that a real game?
I can show you right now, Jonathan. It is, in fact, a real video game that I have over here.
It is a PC game. It plays on Windows 95 or 98 or Mac OS 7.5 or greater. It's an audio CD if you play track 2, and also on this CD is 250 free hours of American Online. Where did you find this?
That is my original copy of Cap'n Crunch's Crunchling Adventure, which you got from, you would send in box tops or whatever. You remember that Calvin the Hobbes skit about getting the fucking hat with the little diddly propeller on top? It was basically that, but it was a bad PC video. I mean, the best PC video game ever made.
I mean, this is important to talk about. This is a kind of video game you do not get anymore.
No, it does not exist.
The last gasp of this was probably the Burger King trilogy on 360.
Yes, Sneak King and all those. Yeah,
when you would get these shitty promotional tie-in games. I mean, God, these go on the pile with Tiger Electronics and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
But it's a reminder that the world of video games is vast and there are depths that we have never plumbed. But I have played Cap'n Crunch's Crunchling Adventure and the CD still works.
Okay, it does.
Yes, I could. If I put this into my PC, I could play this video game right now.
How the hell? Oh my God, that's so bizarre.
It's amazing.
Because there are a lot of games that would say that on the cover of Windows 95, 98 that would not work anymore.
No, yes, I don't think I can play the original StarCraft or Diablo files on this computer because they're so outdated, but I can play Cap'n Crunch's Crunchling Adventure, which is great because it's better than those games, as you'll find out.
Oh yeah. All right, you want to go ahead and get into the list?
Let's get into the list, Jonathan.
All right, this will be part 1. We will do part 2 next week. We are going to do number 10 through 6 this week, 5 through 1 next week, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
I don't care.
I'll go first.
Jonathan, you go first.
All right, my number 10 favorite game of all time. This is a series that I have always loved. In some ways was my first video game obsession. And in 2013, I wrestled with it and did not put this series on my list. And this time, I had to, and I knew it had to be here, and I knew which one. And this is Pokemon Crystal.
Crystal.
Yeah, Pokemon Crystal, 2001, Game Boy Color. This is my favorite Pokemon game. I think there are arguments for different Pokemon games. You know, when I was a kid, I think the one I probably got most obsessed with was Ruby on the Game Boy Advance, because it just like hit me at the right age. But obviously, red, blue, yellow. I think I had red first. I know I rented yellow first from the local Blockbuster because that was still a thing.
Yes, renting Game Boy games was weird.
It was.
It's like it's so easy to lose something like that.
It is. So anyway, but yeah, Pokemon, you know, I was obsessed with the cartoon as a kid. I was obsessed with the video games. I remember the Christmas where I got Pokemon Gold very vividly. I also remember that my first copy of Pokemon Gold was a bootleg cart from eBay because my dad was kind of cheap, and that's how he got it for me for Christmas that year, the year it came out. And then years later, I was able to replace that with a real cart of gold. But Pokemon Crystal is even better. Pokemon Crystal, if you don't know, this is the second generation of Pokemon games, so these were the color games. Crystal was the third version of them. So you had Gold, Silver, and then a year later they did Crystal. Crystal added a bunch of really cool stuff to the world of Pokemon. It's the first one where you could play as a girl. So you did the boy-girl thing. And I always play as a girl in Crystal because her character design is fucking awesome. She's got blue hair, and it's really cool. And you just name her Crystal, and it's neat. It works. So I like the girl in that game. It also added animations to all the Pokemon. So like when they came into battle, they would do this little animation that's really, even now, I think it's really neat when you go back to the Game Boy Color version and watch that, because it's easy to forget. Pokemon didn't do that again for years. Because I think on the Game Boy and then on the first couple DS games, the Pokemon were still just static animations, but they would move in Crystal. The day-night stuff, a lot of that stuff that was already in Gold and Silver was also very revolutionary for the time. Crystal added the little signs when you got into towns. It just did a lot of nice little things. Obviously, you can get Suicune, or Suicune, however you say it, who is one of my favorite legendary Pokemon, because he's just fucking cool. But overall, this is really about the entire second generation. Crystal is like the specific one that I think is the best. It's got enough little improvements that it's the one I point to. But you can see this as a stand-in for Gold or Silver. Like, take your pick, whichever one you like best. The thing about Pokemon Crystal, because I replayed this in full about a year or two ago, emulating on my PC, or on my Mac, and then it came out on the 3DS earlier this year, so I'm actually in the middle of a playthrough of it again. I'm like 8 hours in. I've just been kind of playing around with it when I'm not doing anything else. And what surprised me about it, and what surprises me every time I come back, is how surprisingly dark and rich the tone of these specific Pokemon games is. The rival, for instance, is a bad guy who abuses his Pokemon and never repents. He's just a criminal. He's got no real redeeming qualities, unlike every other rival in the series. Like, Gary is a dick, but that's like, he's not an evil dick. He's just, he smell you later.
Yes, that fucking asshole.
Yeah, but this guy, even at the end of the game, there's like no absolution where this guy is like, you know what, I should treat my Pokemon better. I'm going to go be a good Pokemon trainer. It never happens. Team Rocket comes back in this one, and they are cutting off Slowpoke tails. And when you meet one of the Slowpokes, it's got mail from Kurt, the Pokeball maker, reminding you that the Slowpoke is their beloved pet. So there's dark things like that. You encounter a set of ruins early on in the game with this really creepy atmosphere and mysterious Pokemon, the unknown. There's the Bellsprout Tower early on with the monks and the creepy music and the swaying center. Goldenrod City has an underground path where seedy trainers demand battles, and there's a woman selling these weird concoctions for inflated prices, which is basically Pokemon drug dealing. There's a casino in Goldenrod that's a full-on seedy gambling den with slot machines and prizes. I think Gold and Silver and Crystal go for something tone-wise that the other games never really attempt. It's often dark and creepy, and the fact that it does so many little gameplay things to increase realism and immersion, like the day and night cycle, the Pokegear, the phone calls, the radio, etc., most of which the series never brought back or even tried again for years and years, like into the 3DS era, only increases that sense to me, because it really feels like a living world, not just full of mystery, but full of danger. And in, addition to that, I really love the atmosphere and style of this game. It's got such a distinct sense of place. Like, Johto, to me, is the most distinctive region because it is a very Japanese feel. It's got all these shrines that are very Shinto kind of in their, basis. It really looks like Japan if you've ever, seen a picture of Japan, let alone, like, watched a movie or gone there or anything like that. Kanto has some of that, but is a little more nondescript. And then they did a lot of vaguely European settings after that. I think the next one that tried this was Pokemon X and Y, which was basically just set in France, and that was really cool. But I just love how alive the game feels in that way. I think the whole treatment of Team Rocket in this game is really interesting because they're just in shambles. There's no master plan at work. They're just trying to get themselves back on the map. And Team Rocket is just this thorn in your side that keeps coming up. And their plan is just like to take over the radio tower to broadcast a signal to try to find Giovanni. That's it. In a weird way, I think it's effective because it's not like the formula of every other Pokemon game where you have Team X who wants to destroy the world for reason Y and you have to stop them. This time it's basically just the Pokemon Yakuza who have no larger plan. They're just trying to get enough money and resources to do their thing. There's just so many little things I love in this game. I love the specific Pokemon that are introduced in this one. Plus you get most of the original Pokemon cast, the original 151, so I think it's a real best of both worlds thing. And of course, as a sequel, this one is just epic. It's an all-new world. It's bigger. It's more colorful. With all the returning Pokemon and characters, all the new stuff to do, it really feels like it expands the boundaries and mythos and potential of this world from the first one, only to reward you at the end with a trip back home because you get to go back to Kanto at the end of Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal and do all of it again if you want. It's got all the original 8 badges, all the places, now in, full color, which they were not in the original releases. This is really one of the most just epic and ambitious sequels I've ever seen, and it contains everything I love about Pokemon. It also, significantly for me, I wanted a Game Boy game on my list because Game Boy was my first console. I bought my Game Boy Color from Target when I was in first grade, I think, or kindergarten. No, not kindergarten. It would have been first grade. And I used the money that I forget how it was one of my early allowance things. And I got a Game Boy Color. My first game was Wario Land, which I love. Not on the list, but a great game. And the Pokemon games obviously were a significant part of that. I also just love the look of Game Boy Color games. I think the way those games use this super bright, colorful palette is beautiful. I love the look of pretty much every Game Boy Color game I've ever seen. Another one significantly would be Link's Awakening, DX edition. I just think they're really gorgeous games because they basically have the graphical capabilities of, an NES game. But I think they look a lot sort of cleaner and sharper and nicer than that. And, Crystal and Silver and Gold have been remade for the Nintendo DS as Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but I don't like those versions as much. I really like going back to the original Game Boy Color releases and playing them that way because I just think they look so gorgeous. I think there is a specific magic to Pokemon that in some ways is still at its purest when there is sort of less on screen as in the original Game Boy games.
Hear, hear.
Yes, and I think for me the magic, especially as I go throughout my life and I go back to these games, has never been as perfect as it is for me when playing Pokemon Crystal. It's easy to rag on the Pokemon games, especially now, because while they have, it's a myth to say they've never changed or evolved. They've done a lot of little changes and evolutions, but overall, it is still Pokemon.
Yeah, for a game series that started in 1996,
right. It
is not changed as much as others.
You still have 4 moves, you still have 6 Pokemon, those sorts of things, right? But I think you go back to the originals, it's easy to forget what makes them so genuinely good and deep and interesting as games, as RPGs. I don't think they're just baby's first RPGs. I think they really do have an interesting, different lens onto what a big JRPG can be, because they are, there's a lot of narrative in the world, but they're not heavily narrativized games. There's a lot of characters and NPCs, but that's not what the game is about. It really is, it takes that kind of central conceit of traveling, dungeons, battling, and makes it such a central part of the game with you and the bond between your Pokemon. And that's still a magical thing, even or maybe especially when they are little sprites on your Game Boy screen. Yeah. This is one of my favorite games, and I'm glad I can put it on the list.
Awesome. What is your favorite starter from the second generation?
Chikorita.
Chikorita, really?
I love Chikorita. I don't even know if I can tell you why. I love the name. I think Chikorita is a fun name. I love Chikorita's base design. The evolutions, Bayleaf and Meganium, are not as cool, but they're fine. I just think Chikorita's neat. Chikorita is not a super useful Pokemon because Chikorita learns actually very few moves, which I realized when I started replaying it again recently, and I picked Chikorita again. But I don't know, there's a lot of cool Pokemon in Johto. Like, they have a very distinct look. Again, the best Pokemon are in Generation 1.
Yeah.
But I do think Generation 2 is a great bridge where it feels like you've got that basis of the original 150. They've kind of thinned out some of the worst from that generation and then filled in a bunch of new ones that look really cool. There's kind of an overall style to them that's a little, again, like darker, weirder, and I do like the general blend of that.
Yeah, and then I liked how they, since it was, the first Pokemon sequel, they went back to the originals and added in, Pichu or Steelix and kind of filled in some gaps of new evolutions or devolutions or whatever.
Yeah, I wish they would do more. They've done a little bit of that over the years. Like, they've added some more stuff, but there are a lot of cool ones like that are neat to see.
Yes. Pokemon is good. Pokemon is not on my list. I'll just say that right now. I don't think people probably didn't really expect it. We'll probably at the very end of this go through some honorable mentions or other games that we considered. Pokemon Red is one of those that's I knew wasn't going to make it on my list, but was it is a hugely important game to me. It's definitely my favorite handheld game I've ever played, and it defines that era of my life for me in some ways. And so, yes, I 100% respect and agree with your choice.
I'm glad we got to talk about it at some length on this episode.
Yes, Pokemon is good.
Your number 10.
My number 10 is a game that probably wouldn't be on this list if we had not literally just replayed it, and it earned its 10th spot for me. My number 10 is The Last of Us. The Last of Us, yes, from 2013/2014, whichever version you go to. I've now played it 3 times through. And this was something of where we started talking about doing this episode a while ago. And so, I had, it's been a couple of months for, I think, both of us of, ruminating in our heads or, writing down lists and, lists of
I've
games.
replayed a lot of games.
Yes, I've, retouched games, and the problem with games is, as opposed to movies, it's a lot harder to replay through a lot of these games than it is to replay or to rewatch a movie.
And I'll tell you, in the stuff portions of the podcast for the last couple months, I've been holding off on talking about a lot of things I've been doing for this episode.
Yes, yeah, the same for me of just going back and touching different games. And The Last of Us is one of those that before we did the replay for that in that episode and with the E3 stuff happening that kind of motivated it, I don't think The Last of Us would have quite made it. I think it would have been an honorable mention. And then when we get to honorable mentions, I'll point out what the other game probably would have been my number 10. It probably would have people surprised. It's another zombie game. But yeah, replaying through The Last of Us again, and now having played it 3 times and replaying through Left Behind and all that, which The Last of Us Left Behind is sort of conjoined to it for me, that has really cemented it as being one of my favorite games, I think. And I don't know how long I want to go on about it since we literally just had an episode talking all about this game. But, and I didn't do what I did for this list that I did for the movie list of writing out a, paragraph of weird, sort of philosophical, poetic ramblings on stuff. Instead, I have done what is now become my traditional form for celebrating my favorite games that come out, which is I give them fake bullshit awards for things I like about them.
Okay.
So I only have 2 that I thought of for The Last of Us. The first one and most important is the Best Ever Banjo Award, which goes to Gustavo Santaolalla, the composer and the soundtrack of The Last of Us. The soundtrack for The Last of Us is one that I think kind of is under-discussed in some ways because it's such a non-traditional video game soundtrack. It's not, the big sweeping epic orchestral music of an RPG that you're so used to. It's not the super catchy melodic kind of thing that you expect from, older games and maybe some RPGs and battle themes and that kind of stuff. It doesn't fit into the usual boxes of video game music that we get. It instead is this very interesting, very unique kind of score that has such an earthy kind of grit feel to it. It uses really interesting instrumentation, making, again, excellent, unparalleled use of the banjo in video game soundtracks, in my experience. And it's the soundtrack in everything about the game is so fit in there. And the game, as with many of the games on my list, one of the main things I appreciate about a video game, and one of the main things that will cause me to really fall in love with it, is for the video game to represent some sort of holistic experience. And it's that thing that is, I think, extremely difficult to do with games because there are so many moving parts. You have music, you have visuals, you have like art design and like technical design with the graphics. You have obviously gameplay design and like level design and everything that goes under gameplay design with combat and weapon modeling and AI behaviors and all that stuff. And then you have traditional narrative experiences that need to be wrapped up in there, even if it's in like a very light sense, as in like, you know, lots of old games like Super Mario Brothers. There's not a lot of narrative design, but there has to be some narrative design. There are very few games that have none of that. And so games have to combine all of those elements together and wrangle them. And if it's a big, sort of more modern game, it also has to do that with teams that can be of hundreds of people. Like, and Naughty Dog actually, like, kind of famously does not have quite the ballooned team size as a lot of other big teams, and they're more like, we get like the best of the best together and work really hard and have a good like team, like studio ethic. But yeah, like even then, you know, you're talking dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people all doing work that is 100% critical to the entire game working. And The Last of Us is one of those games that every single individual element of it, from the writing, from the performances, from the artistic, like graphical design, from the technical elements of it, from the music, from the gameplay and the writing and everything, like all of it fits together perfectly to communicate, I think, this holistic experience about survival, about exploring the boundary line between what we traditionally consider human and what we traditionally consider animal. And that element of it is so thoughtfully done, so brilliantly explored by our two primary performers, Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, who win the Nolan North Presents Best Performance Award. It's a tie. Troy Baker as Joel and Ashley Johnson as Ellie. Both take that award home. Unfortunately, Nolan North didn't quite make it.
I think Nolan North gets a special commendation.
Yes, he gets a special commendation, and he can't win the award because he's giving the award, and
That's
it would just
true.
be awkward. He can't just hand it to himself. It would just be confusing.
He is very good in The Last.
He is very good. I mean, everybody's good in The Last of Us.
Yes.
You know, Marlene and Tess. Those performances are also fantastic. You know, the work that Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley did as the narrative director and game director, respectively, is just incredible. It was a hugely influential, groundbreaking game, as we now know, in the year of 2018. Which is one of the things that it was not on my list in 2013 because we had just, in the old list, because we had just played it, and I specifically didn't want to put it on the list to see if it would stand up to me, because again, like that was like a month after I played it for the first time. And I'm happy to say that now in the year 2018, and having had time for The Last of Us to sit, to see how it's aged, to see how it's influenced the industry, it is really apparent to me that it is that good. It is as good to me now, or if not even, I think, better now than how I felt about it in 2013. It is aged so beautifully and so perfectly. And if you want to hear us talk about every element of the game design and the story, we have a podcast in 2013 you can listen to. We have a podcast in 2018 now you can listen to. And so I don't want to go into super in-depth with that stuff, but The Last of Us is just an utterly incredible game to me.
Amazing game. If you're writing the history of this generation in a couple of years and you're trying to, like, which would be a cool book to write, like, you know,
Yeah.
what is the significant trends of this generation? The Last of Us is chapter 1.
Yeah.
I really do think that, and it's beautiful, and maybe we'll talk about it again later in this episode.
It might happen. Who knows?
It might happen. Who knows? All right, my number 9 is Fire Emblem Awakening.
I think you might have made a mistake. I think that's not the one that has Lyn in it, right? So you want the one with Lyn in it, right?
That one's just called Fire Emblem, and I would have considered it, but it's too confusingly titled.
Oh.
You know? I'm kidding. I love that one, too. Look, guys, you know I love Fire Emblem.
Yeah.
Fire Emblem is one of my favorite things in the world. But the first time I played Fire Emblem was here with the 2012/2013 in North America Rebirth entry, Awakening, which is the game where they basically said, Fire Emblem hasn't sold well in a while. You know, we were on consoles with GameCube and Wii, but now we're being moved back to the handheld space with the 3DS, and we're not sure if we're going to be able to keep this thing up. So why not? Let's put everything we have on the line. Let's leave it all on the field, and let's make the best goddamn Fire Emblem game we can make. And they did it. And not only did they do it, but I think in something that does not always happen in the world of capitalism, they were rewarded for it. They did really good work, and Awakening was a huge hit, and now Fire Emblem is one of Nintendo's single biggest franchises. And there's a reason for that. And I think some people go back to Awakening and are a little like, I don't know, they're like, that's when Fire Emblem became popular, so like I can't be a hipster and like this Fire Emblem game. But I love this game, and when I started playing Awakening, something clicked into place so quickly, deeply, and fundamentally for me that it felt like falling in love. The strategic basics of Fire Emblem's, tactical RPG gameplay are among my very favorite gameplay systems of all time. Like, this is one of my favorite things to play in a video game is Fire Emblem combat. It is just such an extraordinary blend of strategy, puzzle solving, risk-taking, planning, and fantasy make-believe as well, of course, because it's fun to be on the field and, like, have your knight who's, like, low on health and go out for, like, basically a suicide rush and really be in the headspace and imagine you're in, like, an Akira Kurosawa movie or something with your weird little chess piece characters. There's maybe no type of game I get more deeply lost in than a Fire Emblem, and playing this hyper-polished swing-for-the-fences Awakening felt like discovering a game I'd been missing but wanting my entire life. Now, I've since gone back and forth in the series since then, playing the newer entries and the previous entries. I've played everything you can easily get your hands on in English, which means I have not played the Radiance duology from the GameCube and Wii, which are so out of print they cost hundreds of dollars.
Right.
So I've not played those. And I think certain games do certain things better than Awakening. I think the two GBA games have my favorite just pure combat encounters because they're fucking brutal. I will never forget in the Sacred Stones, the thing on the ships where you have... Because the ship levels are always hard, but the one in the Sacred Stones, you know it. Uh-huh. You've played it like 15 years ago.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about.
I still know it, yes. It is scarred in me.
Yep, those have maybe my favorite combat encounters. Fire Emblem Fates probably has my favorite soundtrack. The recent Fire Emblem Echoes has my favorite story and presentation. But I think there's just something about the complete package of Awakening that is irresistible to me. The story isn't just good, but it is vast. I've always thought it feels like an epic trilogy. You can actually pretty much break the points where, like, it feels like, a Lord of the Rings trilogy styled, like, size of story in a game. And you have these big, crests of rising action and falling action that kind of starts over again. And it's just so vast and big and interesting. This story of, these specific characters, but also this nation in turmoil. The characters who are already iconic from this game, such as Lucina and Chrom and Robin and all those characters, they forge such a deep connection with the player that I think it really makes the series' permadeath mechanics feel all the more immediate. And of course, the conceit that they introduced here of characters falling in love and forging relationships on the battlefield, which then reward you with extra conversations and new characters to play as in the other half of the game, I think that's one of the most brilliant blends of narrative and gameplay mechanics this side of the social links in Persona. So Awakening is just a complete package. It is a beautiful game. And of course, there's the memories. I've played Awakening twice. It is, on my activity log, the game I have spent the second most amount of time playing on my 3DS, which is still maybe my favorite console of all time. And it feels less like a game I played than something I experienced, lived in, digested like real memories. And I know I said Fates was my favorite soundtrack earlier, and it probably is, but the soundtrack of Awakening is still absolutely fucking killer. The ending of this game, when you are, mild spoilers, on the back of the big dragon, because of course you have to defeat a big dragon, it's Fire Emblem, and that theme is playing, and they put you in this like impossible scenario where you've got to have characters kind of holding up the rear so that your main character can get to the front and have this final confrontation. It is so insanely epic. And then I think the specific small grace notes the story chooses to go out on are bold and beautiful and haunting. And I really do think Fire Emblem Awakening is one of the best games of all time. It is no small thing to not only resurrect a franchise, but firmly plant it as one of the dominant franchises of the decade. For a franchise that started on the NES. It's crazy, and I think Awakening is truly that good. I'm glad I could have a 3DS game on this list, because I should say, it depends on how you count some of these. Every game on this list is from a different console for me, which I kind of like. And so this is sort of my 3DS entry, and yeah, if you have not played Fire Emblem Awakening, you should. It's one of the best games ever made.
Yes. Everybody knows I also love Fire Emblem. I've never played Awakening because my Fire Emblem is contained in the Game Boy Advance. That's where I go for it. But Game Boy Advance SP specifically.
Yes.
But I deeply respect.
Fire Emblem and Fire Emblem the Sacred Stones on GBA are also tremendous, tremendous games.
So good.
I mean, I've never played a Fire Emblem I did not love, But yes, particularly that first one on GBA.
There's something so pure about it.
It is, and it's, great characters, great story. Someday Nintendo should release official translations of the other Fire Emblem GBA games, since the original Fire Emblem GBA is actually a prequel to the previous Fire Emblem on GBA, which has a bunch of fan translations, and I'm sure I will play it one day. But yes, Fire Emblem's awesome.
Awesome.
All right.
My number 9. A very difficult game for me to pick which one of these I wanted to do. My number 9 is Bloodborne.
Interesting. I was wondering if we would get this and which one it would be.
Yes, this was... Because Bloodborne is, like, accepting it for, like, the entire Dark Souls lineage of games. And it's something of where it probably would be higher on the list. It's almost like a weird, like, third-party thing, like an election of, like... There's so many different factions vying for the Dark Souls spot between Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls 3 for me. That's like, they all kind of, neither one was a clear winner. It was mostly down to Bloodborne and Dark Souls that I feel like that kind of sunk it down to the list because it's just like, I don't know which one of these to pick. I ultimately picked Bloodborne, but to talk about Bloodborne, I have to just talk about Dark Souls in general, because I don't remember if I had played Dark Souls by the time we did our last list.
You had not, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think it was like right before I decided to take that plunge, because 2014 is when Dark Souls 2 came out.
Yes.
And so I played Dark Souls before Dark Souls 2 came out. But it was a whole weird experience of playing Demon Souls, which is, for people who hear people talk about Dark Souls games, they're always, I think, confused by what the fuck Demon Souls is, because it's not called Dark Souls. Demon Souls is the first one. Dark Souls is the one that popularized it. And Demon Souls came out on the PS Plus games for PS3 when we were in the condo, and I had access to a PS3, and so I picked it up.
I still have it on my PS3.
Yes, and my save file is probably still there. That's like 6 hours in, and it was a weird experience of, the game actually clicked for me pretty quickly, but there are elements of Demon Souls that are just rough enough in terms of some of the level design stuff feels unfair in a way that later Souls games never really quite felt to me, of just like, oh, there's no way to avoid this, you're just going to get killed by this fucking dragon because you have no idea that it's going to come down. And some of that stuff was just a little bit rough, and I kind of walked away from it. And then later, I started hearing about Dark Souls 2 and looking at YouTube videos of Dark Souls 1 and being like, there was something about that tone, that aesthetic, and that very unique combination of intricate level design with like really brutal, exacting, deliberate combat that no other game has ever really done. Like, the closest is something like maybe the old like 2D pre-Symphony of the Night Castlevanias, like Rondo of Blood, are the closest equivalent I can think of like those Dark Souls games, particularly at that point before they got so popularized. And so then I picked up Dark Souls 1. I was like, I'm going to give this another shot. This game seems a little bit better than the last one. And so immediately and deeply fell in love with that game, to then play Dark Souls 2, which is a game I respect a lot about, but is way too long and has too many bosses and is kind of rough, to then Bloodborne, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, to which is just an amazing evolution of that franchise. And this, of course, Dark Souls 3, which is like the culmination of that whole weird series of games and the strange mythos built up in them by Hidetaka Miyazaki, the game director of the franchise. And it's such a brilliant, unique, I can kind of think like, genre-shattering, kind of like video game market-shattering kind of revelation, Dark Souls 1, of, Demon Souls laid so much of the groundwork but never quite hit the way that then when Dark Souls came out and then started getting that roll like a snowball rolling down the hill, until eventually it just like broke down the doors to the castle of video games and said, fuck you guys, like fuck your over tutorializing bullshit, like fuck having like ignoring a lot of like kind of gameplay concerns for trying to be over involved with storytelling and jamming storytelling and like really overt heavy storytelling in a game that does not need it. I don't mind like story heavy games, but not every game needs that much story to it.
I do think, from the outside looking in, one of the craziest things, there are two craziest things about Dark Souls to me this generation, is that it was an annualized franchise for about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And who knows, still might be. We did get a release this year in Dark Souls Remastered.
It's true.
But the other thing is that, Nintendo has, always like gone in and out of like how much it is influencing things, but I feel like one of the series where you can see maybe the clearest impact of like maybe more Nintendo-esque storytelling like ethos is in weirdly Dark Souls, which is a series that otherwise does not look like a fucking Nintendo game.
No, yes, but it feels like an old school video game made with like modern design language and modern aesthetics, and that's where I make those like Castlevania comparisons, is that the combat is deliberate and exacting, and every element of the game is designed with a very like a gameplay first kind of mentality of the risk reward situations revolving around how you use stamina, when you attack, when you roll, when you block, how you engage with those systems, and then all that is couched in these very deep, rich environments that tell so much of a story without having to basically tell you anything, but just exploring those worlds and seeing it is what, and seeing and putting the dots together and kind of connecting in your mind how these like strange esoteric characters and architecture all relate to each other. And for me, the game that epitomizes that more than any of the other ones, even though Dark Souls was the one that like got me into it and I love it and like respect it so much for that, Bloodborne is the one of those that is my favorite, that I think is the best. And that's for a lot of different reasons, and a lot of them that are particular to me, of that, while I do very much enjoy fantasy settings and dark fantasy like Dark Souls, it is the Victorian horror mixed with Lovecraft thing that Bloodborne has going on that makes it so completely unique. There is no other thing that looks like it, because it is this like culmination of three very different elements and influences, which is the Victorian Gothic, H.P. Lovecraft, and cosmic horror, and then the very unique kind of like Japanese horror, J-horror vibe that Miyazaki and his team have at From Software, all combining together to create what is like some of the most horrific, disgusting shit I've ever seen in anything ever. And both just like, it's just gross, but then also it's like kind of psychologically harrowing in the way that Lovecraft is, and it has this incredibly rich, deep, thick, like soupy atmosphere to it, of every single environment, every single enemy design, every single piece of armor, every character you run into, all the animation, all the music, which is also great in Bloodborne. Like all of that is all put together to create this just rich, unique atmosphere and tone that is so heavy, so pervasive, that is so, again, just like rich. It feels like tangible. That I didn't go back and play a lot of Bloodborne before I made this list, because I kind of waffled so much on what I was going to do with these games at all. But I did watch a bunch of YouTube videos and just kind of like get back into that sense of like, what is this world and how does it feel and what are these creatures? And so to talk a bit about some of the awards I gave it, they got the best Dark Souls game, even though it's not technically says Souls or Dark anywhere in the title. Bloodborne is one of those games, and it is the best one of those games.
It says Dark and Souls, and it's aesthetics.
Aesthetics, yes. That it is very much one of those games. It also gets, I think this is a very important award, the What the Fucking Fuck Award, which goes up to those fucked up blood bug monster things in the Snow Castle level. Seriously, fuck that shit. Which those are these giant, like, they basically look like giant, like, lice or something, and they have these big engorged bellies filled with blood and these long tongues that leak out, and they have, their legs are all, like, crooked and splayed over, so they're on all four legs and have that kind of, like, J-horror vibe, and then they jump up into the air, again, like insects, but they are gigantic, and then when you kill them, they explode into a, like, blossom of blood just spouting everywhere because of all the blood that they've sucked up from the other corpses that they're feeding on, and that is by far, I think, the most affecting character, like, enemy design in the game that, like, has stuck with me so hard. The runner-up for the What the Fucking Fuck Award, in a very different way, goes to what I have lovingly called the amygdala twist, which is this is like light spoilers for Bloodborne, but whatever, like, we're going to spoil some of these games. About halfway through the game, you go into this forest and kind of like encounter this boss and defeat this boss that reveals to you one of like the key natures of the world of Yharnam, which is the like sort of Victorian Gothic city that you're in at the beginning of the game, that completely shifts the way that you see everything in the world, where that's where the Lovecraft stuff kind of like fully settles down and is like, oh, this is not Victorian Gothic, this is cosmic horror. because there are these great old ones, these ancient like cosmic gods from other dimensions working behind the scenes that are corrupting people, twisting them into these monsters. It's not just this weird blood virus stuff that's going on. There are these like, ancient cruel deities from on high that are manipulating all these things. And so when you kind of get the insight in the game to reveal that truth, the way you see the world literally is transformed in that all of a sudden on all these buildings in Yharnam, these like towering gothic skyscrapers with gargoyles and flying buttresses and everything, you see these gigantic, disgusting spider monsters with massive twisted heads that are just hanging on the sides of these buildings everywhere. And they have been there the whole time. You just didn't have... You quite literally weren't insane enough to see them yet. You hadn't seen enough and understood enough to have the insight and the like insanity to be able to understand like what is actually going on like behind the fabric of reality in this world. And one of the things that's amazing about that twist is that before that point, if you go to those areas in the game where they are like hanging down low enough for them to reach you, they do like reach out and grab you and kill you. But before you know that they're there, you just get like whisked up into the air by some invisible force that's like emanating some like black energy, and you just get killed immediately. And then you encounter this boss and see them and realize that's what the fuck that's been. Giant evil alien spider monsters like towering and crawling along the like gothic spires of the city. They're just like feeding off the negative emotional energy of its inhabitants and murdering people. And it's like, and that's what Bloodborne is it is this slow unraveling of this dark, fucked up Victorian city, and you realizing the forces that exist behind again, like the wall of reality that you assume exists, that are influencing all of that and digging deeper and deeper and deeper into this really fucked up mess. And it is, like, Bloodborne is not only like one of my favorite video games, it is my favorite piece of cosmic horror for all of that stuff, because it exists in that space of cosmic horror so naturally that it, like, the only way that it works is to have you feel like you are encountering something so massive, so unknowable, so truly and utterly alien from any element of human experience that you can't even understand what it is. And it is like staring into the heart of a black hole. And it is that, like, the enormity of space and existence itself makes you feel so small and insignificant and so vulnerable to everything that it frightens you. And that is like the fundamental mechanism upon which cosmic horror works. And I think because that is like such a heady, strange philosophical concept, it doesn't work a lot of the time. It is very hard to do. I think, like, Lovecraft, honestly, for me, only one of his stories, the original Call of Cthulhu, has ever quite hit it for me. I think I've read almost all of Lovecraft's stuff, and a lot of it is pretty good, but none of it has ever quite hit that space for me. And Bloodborne does it so hard because it takes you step by step through this world, and you are doing what only a video game can do, where you are literally actually encountering these strange, deformed, like, massive entities and having to confront them directly and see the effects that they have on the city and the people around them, and sort of pushing you down into utter horror, you know. And so all that stuff is just amazing. I now want to give my next title for not just for Bloodborne, but specifically to one boss in Bloodborne. Gets the greatest disparity between quality of boss and quality of boss name. Lifetime title holder goes to Rom the Vacuous Spider, which is the one boss in Bloodborne I hate fighting, but is kind of my favorite boss in Bloodborne, because the game design is not great, but the character design is awesome, and the name Rom the Vacuous Spider is the coolest fucking thing ever uttered. It's ever invented in the mind of man. Rom the Vacuous Spider is such a good fucking name, and says so much about the tone of Bloodborne that you can just drop that name and it's like, yep, that's what Bloodborne is. Bloodborne has fucking Rom the Vacuous Spider in it.
Man, I can't wait for Jared Leto starring in Rom the Vacuous Spider, the movie, in 2021.
Yes, it's such a good name. It's such a great game. Like, even beyond all the tone and atmosphere stuff, you know, because again, like with The Last of Us, it is a game where every element of it kind of jives together to create that, like, singular vision. But then, of course, if you're talking about a Souls game, you have to talk about the combat design and the level design, which is so spectacular in Bloodborne. It has the intricate labyrinthine level design of all these games, of you going through these areas, exploring these areas, trying to kind of learn where you need to go, how you can maneuver around this environment and where the enemies are and how you defeat the enemies. And it is such a sort of like interesting learning puzzle and learning challenge every time you go to a new area and encounter new enemy types and new kind of environments, is understanding how the fuck do I survive in this world, because everything is out to kill me and everything and anything could kill me very easily if I'm not on guard. And so all that element and all those elements in Bloodborne are as spectacular as they are in the best of these games. But then also the thing that sets it apart, and the other reason why it has to be the game representing this franchise for me, is the combat in Bloodborne is the best it's been in any of these games. And part of that is that it plays specifically to my interests in these games, which is playing a heavily mobile, like quick attacking kind of character that relies way more on dodging than on blocking, because Bloodborne looked at the way that people are playing Dark Souls and said, like, man, everyone's just equipping the shield that gives you 100% physical resistance and blocking all this shit and then attacking, and that's how they're playing the game. What if we just didn't let them have shields anymore? And it was such a like mind-blowing change of just like, let's just take this one thing that is in these games and rip it out and to replace it, basically make the parrying slightly easier, and then put in an element that I think was probably fairly influential to the way that they eventually designed Doom from 2016, because from what I understand from hearing about that game, this was a sort of later design process that happened of encouraging you to attack instead of defend, and that in Bloodborne, when you get hit, if you are able to counterattack quickly enough, you can regain a little bit of your health, and health is such a precious, vital resource in this game that when you get hit, your first thought is not, I need to back off and block. Your first thought is, how do I get better at this fight right fucking now? Because if I do not get better and dodge this next attack and hit this guy, I'm not going to win this fight. I don't have enough health items. I can't do this unless I'm playing this well enough. And the way that they just tweaked those little elements of game design, added in this health back mechanic, took away your shield, but made your gun parry thing a lot more effective than the shield parry is in Dark Souls, to encourage you to be very active on defense, so you have to anticipate attacks, interrupt them, instead of just blocking them, which you can do in a very static fashion. They totally reshaped the way that the combat in these games work, to make it just really visceral, really active, really just like, sweaty palms all the time, like dodge, attack, holy fucking shit. And then like the piece de resistance, the crowning like cherry on top of the like horrifying sundae that is Bloodborne, is the trick weapons that they put in, where all the weapons in Bloodborne basically transform between two different modes. And so you have your like cane sword that you can have, that you then smack into the ground and it turns into a long cane whip, like bladed whip. You have the sword that you have this like giant fucking rock thing on your back that you slot in and pull it out, and now it's a big two-handed hammer. The trick weapons are maybe legitimately the coolest thing that's ever been in a video game. It is just from like an aesthetic design component, from an animation component, from a gameplay design component. Having these like transformable weapons allow you to create these very interesting kind of evolving combos by switching dynamically between one mode of the weapon and the other in the middle of attacking. The trick weapons are just so fun to use. In particular, just the little touches of the animations and the sound effects of you like taking this big like kind of hand axe and swinging it out and turning it into a scimitar and it's snapping into place is such a purely kinesthetically pleasing video game action that, it's something where there are fewer weapons in Bloodborne, but because the weapons in Bloodborne are so exciting and so cool, and it's a concept that I missed so deeply in Dark Souls 3, that I hope they make a Bloodborne 2. If they ever go back, if this From Software ever goes back to the Dark Souls well, I hope they make a Bloodborne 2 just so that they can make like 15 more of those fucking trick weapons, because it is the coolest shit in the world.
Nice.
Bloodborne is a very good video game.
Awesome. All right, my number 8 is a game we already talked about. It's The Last of Us. Last of Us got to number 8 on my list. Doesn't necessarily mean I like it more than you, just that it went on a different place on my list.
And ordering this list is very hard and arbitrary.
Yeah, it is. But this felt like the right place for it for me. I think you are going to see across my list a lot of me sort of grappling with the place of narrative in video games, because it's something I think about a lot. I do not think a game needs a heavy amount of narrative to be utterly transfixing, and in fact, I think we focus way too much on traditional, sort of literary modeled forms of storytelling. In game making to a certain extent, but more in like game criticism and how we talk about it, because I think it's a very reductive way to look at video games, and I'll show you that a little bit later on my list. You've already seen with like Pokemon Crystal versus this versus Awakening, but with The Last of Us, I think the thing that really locked into place for me is one of the first things I ever observed about the game way back in 2013 is that I think this game has maybe the lowest buffer ever between a traditional, cinematic literary style story and gameplay in terms of how much you feel like you are in that story. The Last of Us has discrete cutscenes and has long gameplay sections, but when I think about the game, I don't think about the differences between those all that much. And there's not a lot of games that rely heavily on cutscenes where I think that about. I do not think that about Grand Theft Auto 5 or something, right? The cutscenes are movies that interrupt you playing the game so you can watch people say the word fuck over and over again, right? Then The Last of Us, this game is such a masterpiece of putting you in the mind, lives, bodies of these characters, making you feel what they feel, making you feel the experiences they are undergoing, the horror of this situation, the joy of this situation in some rare moments like the giraffe scene. And making, the story is always feeding the gameplay, and the gameplay is always feeding the story. And I think that transference between the two is a truly incredible, groundbreaking thing that, we have done more with this generation, but I'm not sure has ever been matched just as purely as well as Naughty Dog did with The Last of Us. I agree with everything you said about the game earlier on. We have a whole podcast about it. I'm not going to go on about this for that long because I don't know what more there is to say. I think one of the main topics of our podcast last week was really about that, how brilliant the gameplay is and how it works on a gameplay mechanical level to tell and inform that story. And I do really think, Naughty Dog is sadly, I think, a recipient of this talking about narrative over everything else problem and criticism a lot, in that people are like, oh, Uncharted is it's like a movie that you play, or The Last of Us, it's so cinematic, it's like a movie that you play. No, it's a video game. And it couldn't work if it wasn't a video game. And I know that because Uncharted is more exciting than pretty much any adventure film other than Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
And I know that because The Last of Us is better than any other zombie piece of fiction I have ever encountered. And I know that because if you dive into any level of the gameplay systems going on in The Last of Us, there's real interesting, brilliant mechanical thought going into all of that. And I encourage you to listen to our podcast from last week if you want to hear more about this. But yeah, I was in the same position as you, Sean. I was not sure if The Last of Us would be on my list this time. It was right smack dab in the middle of my list last time because I was just like, fuck it, I'm not fighting recency bias at all this time. I fought it more this time, you'll see. But yes, The Last of Us, I think 5 years later, has more than earned a position on this list. It is one of the best games of the decade. It is one of the best games of all time. And it will be played and remembered and cherished for years to come. And boy, howdy, does The Last of Us Part 2 have a big mountain to climb.
Yeah, right.
I don't doubt that they can climb it. It's just a big mountain to climb.
Absolutely.
All right, so that's my number 8. Sean.
I think your number 8 video game is also a very good video game, Jonathan.
Oh, good. Yes.
Yes. My number 8 video game, I think, is a little bit better than that one.
Oh.
And this is one... Eventually, when we get to the end of this list, we'll have to talk about recency bias, because I have a couple of recent games on my list. This is one of them, but I think people already know how much I love this game. My number 8 is Hitman 2016.
Interesting. I was wondering if this was going to be on your list.
It had to be. It had to be. It's so... Jonathan, this game is so fucking good, dude. And this is another one of where it's like, it feels sometimes weird with some of these more recent games since we have done podcasts and talked about... I mean, we've talked about Hitman several times on the podcast. We did 2 Let's Plays. We did kind of 4 Let's Plays, but only released 2 of them because the sound didn't work on the first 2.
Yes.
Right? So, yes, this is a game I have played obsessively since I first got... I picked it up at Marrakesh, so that would have been like June or July 2016.
Oh, I thought for a second you were saying you bought it in Marrakesh. I'm like, when did you go to Marrakesh?
Yes, I went to Marrakesh to just sort of like, fuck like ludonarrative dissonance. It's like player-game dissonance I want to shave down to nothing. It is a game that just like invaded every level of my life since I got obsessed with it, and the way that, you know, while we're recording this podcast is right before, you know, to peek back behind the curtain, you will have heard our Mission Impossible discussions before this, but we haven't had those discussions yet. On that podcast, we're going to have to talk about how much the middle hour of Mission Impossible 3 is just Hitman. Like, it's just Hitman. And
the beginning of Mission Impossible Fallout has a lot of Hitman in it.
Yes, but like in particular in Mission Impossible 3, there's the whole scene where they go to the Vatican.
Oh, yeah.
And Philip Seymour Hoffman is there, and they make him, like, trick him to make him go into the bathroom, and then go into the bathroom to knock him out and steal his identity. That's just fucking Hitman.
Yes.
And I cannot look at anything happening in an exotic locale without being like, that would be a good Hitman level.
I know. Like, I actually was thinking this when I was rewatching the Mission Impossible movies too, Sean. I'm like, why do they keep trying to make Hitman movies? They've made them. They're great.
Yes.
They're the Mission Impossible movies, and Tom Cruise is he'd be a great Agent 46.
Yeah. But yeah, with Hitman, but it's not even just watching movies. It's like when I went on that cruise early this year, it was me like walking around being like, God, a Hitman level on a fucking cruise. That probably is in one of the earlier Hitman games. But I hope in Hitman 2 there is a like super rich, like amazing cruise ship that you go on and make a Hitman level on it. Because I can tell you, I spent a lot of time on that cruise ship walking around being like, this would be a good fucking Hitman level. You could get this costume, and there's multiple levels of like different people like serving food versus like people doing the custodianship and then the people running the ship. Like there's all these different costumes you could steal in interesting areas. You could go to the arcade area. You could go to the shitty library that doesn't understand how libraries work. There's so much cool shit you could do on a cruise ship in a Hitman game. And it is just, Hitman is so, like, my love for Hitman is so purely a video game thing. When we're talking about like narrative versus gameplay stuff, the narrative in Hitman, I like the veneer of it and it giving like a theme and tone to Hitman. I think is very effective. I think those cutscenes are well produced, and I like the voice acting a lot between Diane and Agent 47. I think those performances are really good and add a lot to the game. But Hitman is so much about like gameplay, level design, like just this sandbox ridiculous world they've built. That is why I love this game so much. I've given it.
Sean, are you announcing that you've been telling us that you're trying to become an English teacher, but you're really trying to become an international assassin?
I mean, being a high school English teacher would be a good cover story.
You really would.
Yeah, it's like, oh guys, we get to go on our surprise field trip to Paris, France, where the Prime Minister of some obscure country is going to be there. No, he just magically died while I was gone at night. Yeah, maybe we should cut that part of the podcast. We should.
Okay.
But anyways, I'm going to talk about some of the awards I have given Hitman. The first award is the Murder Flower Medal of Distinction. This only goes to games that can allow you to murder every single character in the level. Which is for me that Colorado event that I did in Hitman, the Colorado disaster or whatever, the massacre that occurred, did open my eyes up to and I think that's where the Murder Flower kind of metaphor came from. Is like it is this game that blossoms so much, and like you're constantly seeing new shades of it and like digging deeper and deeper and realizing just how far this sort of like simulation sandbox element of the game goes. With that realization of you can play this game basically any way you want it, and there are lots and lots of games like a Dishonored or a Deus Ex that tells you it's that slider. I hate this genre title, but they call them immersive sim games. I don't like that genre title, but whatever. That's what you call them, the Deus Ex, Dishonored type games. And I like those games okay. I think Dishonored 1 is a very good game. I think Dishonored 2 is also very good, just not different enough. But those games always try to tell you and like put this fucking like screen up in the tutorial that's like, play it your way. And it's like, okay. And then you very quickly discover that when they say play it your way, they mean play this game in exactly one of three ways. You either hack something, you murder something, or you crawl through a vent. And that's everything. Like you have those three options. That's how you're allowed to play those games, because that's how they've designed these more, while they are pseudo sandbox and that you can move around in a lot of different locations, they are effectively linear levels. Hitman is a truly sandbox game that you can play. I mean, obviously, you can't go to these like locations and like set up shop as a hot dog vendor and like that's not what I mean when I say play it your way. When I mean play it your way is that they have given you so many rich tools and toys to play with and constructed this really immaculate, compelling sandbox with a lot of different sort of AI behaviors designed to mix in with those toys you have, that you can approach scenarios in so many different ways that you can spawn into the level from multiple different locations with different disguises. You can bring in so many different abilities with you that it allows a truly sandbox experience that those Dishonored type or Deus Ex type games just simply don't allow you to do, because they are designed with this very specific sort of like level-based narrative design that doesn't suit them. And so that's where Hitman gets another one of my awards, which is the esteemed recognition for most ahead of its time, which goes specifically to the episodic structure and the overall design aesthetic of the game. Like we talked about on a podcast a little bit of like our feelings about Hitman 2 moving away from that episodic structure, and it is clearly the right choice from a business move perspective. But there is that purity of that experience of Hitman and playing Hitman that year of 2016 and seeing that rollout of content and getting the new maps and playing the new maps and getting to talk about it on the podcast and learn more and more about the game. But it isn't even just like needing that episodic structure. It is the entire games as a service model that so many games try to do that Hitman has done better by far than anything that has come out recently.
Yeah, I think if this style of episodic games one day succeeds, we'll be looking back at Hitman and saying it was just ahead of its time.
Yes, it was ahead of its time because it was episodic in a gameplay sense, not in a narrative sense, which is what every other game that does episodes like Half-Life or the Half-Life 2 tried to do, or Telltale games now, but there are a bunch of games like Sin and all this weird PC shit that tried to do the episode stuff in the mid-2000s, and all those failed because they were all trying to do episode things. And then Telltale exceeds by getting brands that people like and then like sort of putting out this like technically like destroyed game that, deletes your saves and all this shit, but people like Batman, so they'll play the Batman game. Whereas Hitman's like, no, if we're going to make an episodic game, let's make an episodic game and really change it and really add a lot of new stuff every single month. And it's not even just the levels. It is tweaks to the way that the AI works. It's the tweaks to like the balance in the game. They did that tweak about like, I think of the early 2017 that changed how much health you had on the normal difficulty, that made the game more accessible for you, Jonathan, so that you could play in your like horrible, murdering, just ridiculous fashion. But that's one of the great things about Hitman, is that it supports you loading into a map, deciding, I'm going to try to just kill every single NPC on this map.
Hitman is, so there's kind of two ways to do a sandbox style thing, I think, roughly. There is let's give you a very limited set of tools, but a lot of ways to use them, which is something like last year Breath of the Wild is kind of that ethos, right?
Yeah, they give you like 6 powers, but like they are really sort of complex powers.
Yes. Whereas Hitman is, and not many games do this other thing, the Hitman thing of, let's give you an absurd amount of things you can do, and like you will probably never discover on your own all the kinds of things you can do within a very complicated world. I don't think one is better than the other, but if you can pull off the latter, that's a fucking achievement. And Hitman pulls it off, because this is the one thing that I do think people, if you picked up the Game of the Year edition of Hitman today, you would have a very fun time and you should do it.
Yes, absolutely.
But the one thing you would be missing from playing it over that course of months in 2016 is that sense of discovery. Like, there is so much content in the game now, you're not going to see it all. You're not going to feel, I think, that same amount of depth into it. And that was kind of the beauty of that. Every month, let's come back for a new one, and you'll discover more and more about it.
Yeah, and it was that sense of being like, it's so experimental in so many cool ways, of also just like the elusive target concept, and see like, well, how are we going to do this? And that was such a big part of how I learned how to play new facets of the game, was playing those elusive targets, which were the targets that spawned in. They did like once every 2 weeks or so over the course of that year, that were like these specifically made hits that you could only do then. And if you died in the middle of the mission, you could not do it again. Like, you had to retry before you killed him, and that was the only time you could retry the mission, is if you didn't kill him yet and you go into the menu and retry. If you got killed, it was over, it was done, you couldn't do it. Or if you missed it entirely, you couldn't go back until they have recently done a like re-roll through of that whole season of elusive targets, which was cool. But that concept was so interesting because it forced me to say, I'm not usually a kind of person that plays these more like stealthy stealth kind of games, and if I do, not in like a stealthy stealth kind of way. Like, I generally prefer the Last of Us model or Splinter Cell Conviction, Blacklist kind of, you do stealth, but you use stealth as a weapon, not as like a like sort of avoidance or game mechanic kind of thing of like, that's, you're trying to stay in stealth all the time. And that's how I felt about Hitman for a long time. And then I tried that on the Chef elusive target, and I told the whole story on the podcast when I did it, of being like, fuck it, I'm going to do the Silent Assassin version where nobody can see you kill him. Nobody nobody can become suspicious of you at all. Nobody can find the body. You have to, and if they do find the body, it has to look like an accident. That's the only way they can find the body. And all those like very severe restrictions because if you did the silent assassin elusive target hits enough times, I think if you did like 7 of them or something, you got the winter coat suit that you could come in with, which was really cool. I wanted that. So I played that chef one, and I learned so much about the game by tracking that chef character through and trying to like reason out with myself, how the fuck do I get this chef guy away from these like 5 people in his entourage? And that was like one of the more difficult elusive targets I later like realized was the first one I tried to do that with, because that is like a very hard AI pattern to kind of break them out of. And just using, it was the revelation of taking the gun I have, because you can only bring in your gun and 2 tools, like a lockpick, coins, whatever, shuriken, like the knife that Jonathan likes using because he's a weirdo. That's like not a very good item to bring in, but he likes it, so whatever. It's not, you usually didn't even bring the fucking concealable knife from what I remember from recording those fucking Let's Plays. It was just...
It's concealable for the search areas, which don't fucking matter, because I would just stab the guy and move past him.
Right,
if you've got a knife, you stab people with it.
Of course. But it was the realization of, I don't have a lot of tools to work with, because again, I can't, because another thing with Silent Assassin is you can't kill anybody else. Like, it's only the target. So I can't go and like knock out a guard and take it, like that's not a good idea. So what I needed to do is like, I have a very limited set of tools to do this with. I have a gun, and I can bring 2 and other things, and one of them was like, I had like the distraction thing you can put on a wall and trigger remotely with like the audio player. I forget what my other one was. I think probably a lockpick, because it was Paris map and you need that. It was this realization of, I need to pull one other person away from this group. I was like, what the fuck do I have? Looked at my inventory. I have this remote audio thing that I don't want to use yet because I need it in a different spot of this level. The lockpick I can't do anything with. And the gun, I was like, wait, I have the fucking gun. And it was the realization of, in every other video game, the only thing you can ever do with a gun is shoot people in the face with it. In Hitman, if you're getting Silent Assassin, you never want to use the gun to shoot people with, but you have to bring in a gun. And what can you do with that gun? You can put it on the ground and people react to it. And the gun is an object that physically exists in the world of the game, in the sandbox, and people acknowledge it, and they will react to it in predictable AI patterns, so you can use that to craft the sort of puzzles, box scenario you need to take this one guy out. And it was that moment of being like, fuck it, like I can just take this gun out, hold down both of the like R1, L1, and just place it on the ground and walk away, and I know this guard's going to turn the corner, see it, and go take that gun and walk away to go put it in the box. And it was that realization of, I can do that with the pistol I bring in with, that just blew the whole hinges off of that game to me, of there's so much depth in that sandbox that you can engage with. Hitman is such a like incredibly rich, rewarding game to play. And then just to wrap up the discussion, I gave it 2 other awards. One I kind of talked about already is A Game So Nice I Can't Stop Playing It award, which goes to Hitman, because I played Hitman a little bit yesterday because I was watching those Mission Impossible movies. Is like, I need to play some Hitman. It's you kind of talk about it is so absurdly content and feature rich. It's like maybe the most content rich game that has come out like this generation, at least like in terms of a like normal console game. And people who have this game and have not tried out the escalation contracts,
they're so good.
Fucking play the escalation contracts. They're so much fun. And that's one of the ways that was another big moment for like me falling deeper and deeper in love with Hitman, was that like trying that out for the first time, because when I just sort of saw them as like, this doesn't look like something I want to do, and then I played a couple, I was like, these are so much fun, and realizing there's like 50 of these fucking things, holy shit, and I played all of them, and that's what we did our Let's Play on, and that was a tremendous amount of fun. Then the last award, and I think this is in many ways the most important, I give it the Buster Keaton Award for Excellence in Physical Comedy, because Hitman is the funniest video game I've ever played, and that's not on accident. It's not like how Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 is a very funny video game completely on accident. Like, the voice acting's terrible, the storytelling is terrible, the loading screen situation is so bad in that game that it is utterly hilarious in many ways, especially when you watch it, but it is not a game that is intentionally funny. I think games typically have a very hard time of being funny outside of writing funny dialogue, which is like, old adventure games, like LucasArts adventure games were very good at that. Like a Tim Schafer game can be very funny, but that's because it's just funny dialogue, well performed. Anything can do that. Movies do that, like audio, like comedic stand-up audio CDs can do that. Everything can do funny dialogue delivered well is just going to be funny. Hitman is a game that is designed to be funny. They have built mechanisms in the game so that when you walk into the room dressed as a chef and have a fucking fire extinguisher, and you put the fire extinguisher overhead and 2-hand overhead throw it into someone's face, and they are within like the edge of their field of view. They can kind of see it out of the corner of their eye. They will turn their head to you and go, "What the fuck?" and then get hit in the head with the fire extinguisher and goes bang, and then they collapse onto the ground. That is fucking hilarious every single time. It's some like Buster Keaton Looney Tunes ass shit that they do, and they have programmed and designed the game so that the AI reacts so perfectly to the ridiculous shit going on in the environment, and the dialogue in the game is very cleverly written, but it is also, it's not just that it's funny dialogue, it's that it is built to be reactive dialogue to what you are doing and how you are affecting the world and affecting these characters. And every time you throw a fucking screwdriver in a dude's face and they go, "Hey, what are you doing?" and they get killed, it's hilarious every single time. And it's something I think is deeply unappreciated about Hitman. I think it's something that everyone enjoys, but nobody points out enough. So I really wanted to indicate one of the reasons why I love Hitman so much is it is so funny. And if it wasn't a very funny game, it would be a very hard game to stomach because you are murdering people all the time. But they made it fucking hilarious, so it's fine.
I like the Looney Tunes comparison because cartoon violence is a lost art.
Yes.
And it is a great art, and we need to rediscover it beyond just Hitman, because I remember there used to be on the ESRB rating labels when I was a kid, for like an E for everyone game, it would always say something like cartoon violence. That is a descriptor of art, not of content.
Exactly.
We need more of it. We need more of it.
Hitman
Right.
is a beautiful, amazing video game. People
I'm
should
really
play.
excited for Hitman 2, Sean.
I'm so excited for Hitman 2.
I can't wait.
It's gonna be a thing on this podcast for
Oh,
sure.
it is. All right, my number 7. It's one of 2 instances where I'm going to cheat a little bit. I think this is a more than defensible cheat. You can yell at me if you want.
I will probably.
Number 7 is the Mass Effect trilogy. Developed 2007 to 2012 by the great folks at BioWare, which might not be a company much longer. Sorry.
No, I will say I can't yell at you for it because I did it on the other podcast, so this one is fine.
I also do on my well, it's in a box right now, but on my shelf have a box that just says Mass Effect Trilogy. That's from a PS3. I've got it listed as an Xbox 360 game here because that was the original launch platform of these games. So that's how I can say I have a different platform for all of these.
Okay.
But yes, I do have that. So that's what I'm referring to is the Mass Effect Trilogy box set. So I have a little thing written here that I'm going to say about this. All right.
Okay.
Most of these I have notes that I'm kind of improvising from, but I actually wrote an entry for this and one other game because it's like a little essay, and I think it says what I need to say here well, because Mass Effect there's a lot you could say about it.
Yeah.
So here's kind of my focused thesis on this game. If we look back at the great Mass Effect 3 ending controversy of 2012, which, in its explosion of violent male gamer entitlement, presaged not only the much uglier harassment campaigns of Gamergate, but arguably much of the troll-infested political climate all of America lives in now, I am struck by how one of the core criticisms bellowed by a subset of the series' supposed fans actually helps clarify why I find BioWare's magnum opus so enormously compelling. This criticism, that 3 games worth of player choice wound up counting for less than expected in the original ending, aka the Artistic Integrity Edition, belies a maddeningly narrow understanding of the words choice, ending, and player. But the more I think about it, the more it also reveals to me how much player choice was always an elaborate sleight of hand BioWare used to draw people in. While on the other hand, the games excelled on the basics of narrative, character development, world building, and game design that really had nothing to do with branching paths, morality meters, or elaborate dialogue wheels. Those flashier marquee elements were all undeniably important to the series' success and unique identity, but not nearly as much so to my mind as BioWare's peerless mastery of those aforementioned fundamentals. Narrative, the Mass Effect trilogy is arguably the greatest extended story told in the history of Western game development, and one of the best pieces of modern pop myth-making period, easily on par with Star Wars, Harry Potter, or The Lord of the Rings, and rivaled only by the latter in depth of thematic engagement with its big existential ideas. Character development, Mass Effect had so many deeply interesting, palpably three-dimensional figures of all genders, backgrounds, and species that it could easily allow you to kill off a shocking number of them in a particularly inept playthrough and still have enough of a stellar cast left over to fuel the next game and then some. World building, Mass Effect 1 made it look easy. The first game dropping in 2007 with such a ludicrously fleshed out, compellingly lived-in world, or more accurately, galaxy, that to extend the Tolkien comparison, one imagines BioWare could fill several tomes the size and density of the Silmarillion and still have lore left over to spare. Game design, Mass Effect had combat and exploration that was exhilaratingly imperfect from the get-go, and then overhauled all of it in the sequel for nothing less than a top-to-bottom re-examination of what an action-based RPG could and should be, arriving at a place of such astonishing perfection that when Mass Effect 3 went back and tweaked these things again, it felt ever so slightly out of whack. Suffice it to say, no other Western developer has come close to striking the gameplay balance BioWare achieved best in Mass Effect 2, but still wildly accomplished in the other two entries in the years since. The magic of Mass Effect does not ultimately come from making choices on a dialogue wheel and then watching those choices ripple outwards throughout the story. It comes from BioWare mastering all the surrounding fundamentals so absurdly well that those choices actually meant something to the player when made. The magic lies in BioWare doing what all narrative-based video games must do so passionately and thoughtfully that any element of player-motivated action carried with it the weight of singularly impactful storytelling, realized in an interactive package that made that story feel alive and immediate in ways it never could in another medium. Games are, like any human creation, a medium of boundaries, and any choice made in them has to be on some level illusory. Mass Effect succeeded by harnessing that illusion, not for the sake of an empty gimmick, but to leverage engagement with one of the deepest, smartest, most complex narratives to ever grace the medium. That's the real magic trick, and it's one we're unlikely to see repeated at this same level anytime soon. So,
yeah,
that's my thoughts on the Mass Effect trilogy, and that's why it has to be the Mass Effect trilogy to me, because the achievement is not just any one game. They are all achievements, and you can pick and choose. But the experience of playing all three of them and seeing the games evolve, but the story continue and just kind of get better with time is still one of the most rewarding and unique things I've ever seen in video games. I don't think it might ever be repeated on this level, because there are other games that feel like maybe they have the weight of an entire Mass Effect trilogy within their one entry. I think The Witcher 3 kind of comes close for me on something like that. But really having it be across these three games, where I think the gameplay roughly gets better over time, although I think you could argue 2 versus 3. I think the story inarguably gets better over time. 3 has my favorite narrative stuff in the series. I've said in the past I can easily separate out Mass Effect 2 as the biggest achievement, and I think in a lot of ways that's very true. But I also think when I play it, when I think back, I say the words Mass Effect and I close my eyes, honestly what hits me is Shepard on the Citadel at the end of Mass Effect 3, making those final choices and feeling the weight of the world on you. And that happened because this was a 5-year project that came out over 3 games, and you had so much weight behind it by the time you got to the end. I just don't think, certainly American game developers have ever quite accomplished something of this scope and scale and size, and I love it to death. And I haven't gone back and replayed the Mass Effect trilogy since I beat it the last time, or the first time, and I want to someday, but I'm also intimidated to, because it feels like such a almost hermetically sealed experience. It would be going back and replaying a memory. You can't do that. You can with Mass Effect, literally, but it would feel weird. These are some of the best games ever made.
Yeah, no, the Mass Effect trilogy is incredible, and with Mass Effect 3 in particular, it's something I've been committed to bring it up on the podcast for literally months. But the Last Jedi shit is so much like the second coming of the ending of Mass Effect 3.
Oh, yeah.
It's unbelievable, and I've been continuously shocked that I haven't seen people point that out more often, because people make the Gamergate connection, which I don't think is wrong. Also, the Gamergate Mass Effect 3 ending controversy connection is definitely there also.
Yep,
it's
that's
a
why
lot
I noted
of the exact same kinds of people. But I do think there's something very direct about it's not just the racism, sexism, and all that sort of the misogyny, maelstrom. It is also this sense of an unbelievable entitlement of the player over what has been produced, and I don't think that's necessarily unique to. I think it's stronger for video games for a bunch of complex reasons, but it is also very true of Star Wars, and I've found that very interesting. And I will always be pro original Mass Effect 3 ending, and people who bitch about it.
Here's why I think the extended cut DLC is fucking bullshit and shouldn't exist. Imagine if Disney tomorrow actually caved and said, Ryan, you're fired, brought in some new people, had them reshoot parts of The Last Jedi, and then sent it to you on a new disc to put with your Blu-ray. That's what they did.
Yeah.
But we never talk about how fucking crazy that is. You can like the ending to whatever. They made their game.
Yeah.
And if you have to patch in, this gun didn't shoot right, fine. go at it.
Yeah.
If you have to patch in an ending, that is, to me, that's not the game's fault. That's a toxic fandom.
Yeah.
And I honestly, and I will fight for this, I think the original ending is perfect the way it is. I don't think it's okay. I don't think it's acceptable. I think it's one of the most astonishing things I've ever seen in any work of fiction, is the ending of Mass Effect. It is amazing. And I think the extended cut dumbs it down, because I think a lot of people, frankly, coming into Mass Effect 3, were not prepared for how deep and complicated and three-dimensional the ideas and themes of this series are. They were there to shoot aliens.
Yes,
and the
shoot
ending of
aliens and fuck blue ladies.
And the ending of Mass Effect 3 is not about shooting aliens or fucking blue ladies.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's stupid. Anyway, Mass Effect is not stupid, except Mass Effect Andromeda.
Yeah.
That's stupid.
Yeah, when we say Mass Effect is great, Andromeda is a different conversation.
Yeah. So, BioWare, I hope Anthem is good. If not, I hope this isn't the last time we talk about you on this podcast.
Yeah. I can confirm
Okay.
it's not quite yet the last time we'll talk about them on this podcast.
All right. Well, that's my number 7. Sean, what's your number 7?
My number 7 is a game I really should have put on my 2013 list, but I was a dumb 5-year younger person back then, and I didn't realize how big this game was to me then. My number 7 game is World of Warcraft. Exactly, that's what I said too. Wow.
No, that's not what I meant. I meant, Sean, I don't know if you've ever talked about this game on the podcast. Are you serious? This is real?
Yes, this is my number 7. This is not a joke. And that's where, and one of the reasons why I never talked about it on the podcast is because I played World of Warcraft before we started the podcast. By the time we started doing this podcast, I was basically done with this game and had to sort of put it away. But yeah, it was something of when we had to, reconsider this list and rebuild the list. It was well before I looked at what was on my 2013 list. I was just doing my walks around and just being like, thinking what games need to be on this list, and there was a top 5 that are my top 5. Like, there are 5 games that immediately came to mind. That's like, those are the top 5 games. They have to be the top 5 games. The order I kind of hatched out later. And then I was thinking, what are some of the other games I need? And World of Warcraft immediately came to mind. And it's something of where I don't talk about it a lot, because also I don't play any other MMOs, so there's not like a lot of room to like compare and contrast and do that kind of stuff. But it is, World of Warcraft was this game I played from, I started playing in 2006 when the Burning Crusade expansion came out. So that was 2 years. It originally came out on my birthday, November 23rd, 2004. I didn't realize that until I went.
You have a lot of weird coincidences.
It's weird.
That have come out on your birthday.
Lots of things have come out on my birthday. I don't know. It makes me vaguely uncomfortable. I don't like it. But
presidents have been shot on your birthday. Yep. Games have come out. Doctor Who's premiered.
It's
just
crazy. It's weird. But yeah. But I didn't play it then. I played it in the Burning Crusade expansion in 2006, which was the first one that introduced like the Blood Elves and the Draenei and the Outland, the other continent, and like flying mountains. It was a huge expansion to that game. And that's when I picked it up. I played it a little bit at my friend's house on his PC, and that was what kind of hooked me, was playing it there and being like, this game is fucking cool and weird and different, and it is still unlike any other game I've ever played. Obviously, there are MMOs that have come out before World of Warcraft. There are a lot of MMOs that have come out since World of Warcraft, and basically all of them have failed or are in like a very minor realm of like free-to-play success stories, like Star Wars: The Old Republic is one of those that like it does well, it makes money, but it's in like its own small pool. World of Warcraft still has like millions and millions and millions of people that are active subscribers. And World of Warcraft is a game that's kind of hard to talk about because it is so huge. But I played it from 2006, probably until about 2011 or so, fairly actively, basically every summer. And myself and a group of my friends basically did this thing of, during the school year, playing World of Warcraft was not like easy to do because of like the kind of time commitment involved, and having school and extracurricular activities like the debate team, and then wanting to play other games that came out. And so it was like we kind of made this weird pact of like, every summer we'll re-up our subscriptions and go back, and sometimes we made new characters. I had Danan, which was like my dwarf hunter, which was my main character that I got up to max level and all that kind of stuff. That I went back to repeatedly, but constantly kind of like being like, oh, let's go to the Horde side, let's make a new Alliance character. And so it was this kind of weird yearly tradition with a group of my friends to do that. And it was this game that I think one of the reasons why I don't talk about it a lot, and one of the reasons why I didn't put it on my list last time, is that World of Warcraft exists in a like different realm to me than other video games, because it is so entirely its own thing. It is so off in its own sphere. It is, this living, breathing game that has been living, breathing for 10 plus years at this point, for 14 years at this point, for God's sakes.
There's an expansion coming out this month.
Yes.
Battle for Azeroth.
Yeah, they have been continually updating and expanding the game.
Sean, when you started Burning Crusade, I'm looking at it here, level cap was raised to 70 for Burning Crusade. Yep. It's becoming 120 this month.
Yes.
That's a lot of levels.
And World of Warcraft is probably like the most successful game ever. Like, it's that kind of thing of like the calculations get difficult when you compare that to like Super Mario Brothers 1, which was like a console pack-in, and Grand Theft Auto 5 that was released like 5 billion times and all that shit, and then has their like free-to-play shit. I guess not free-to-play, but microtransaction stuff. And then World of Warcraft has been this like, I know they've introduced free-to-play elements of like you can play the first 20 levels or something free more recently, but for 10 plus years they did the like, this is just a subscription MMO, and you pay your subscription fee every month, and you are constantly getting updates to warrant that fee. And it is this living, breathing game. And the thing about World of Warcraft that like really made me feel like I had to put it on this list, and there are a couple of other games, there are specifically 2 other games that have this quality that we'll talk about on the next podcast. That games are not just a solitary experience, they are also like a communal, social experience. And it's the kind of thing I have in more recent years kind of moved away from for a lot of reasons, but it is such a big part of my past and my history with games, and then there are some games that I still have that element with. And Hitman is one of those, that there's a whole social dynamic to that game of, we did like Let's Plays and talking about it on this podcast, but then also watching other people's Let's Plays and community videos on it, and the community like the hits that they have sometimes done. Like, those social elements of games are very important and incredibly unique, and it's very easy for me personally to sometimes forget about that and kind of like put it out of my mind and be like, oh no, it's like the big story games, it's the big RPGs, it's the big like that stuff is the stuff I think of, because from like a traditional academic sense with the training and experience I have, that's the stuff that's way easier for me to talk about, because that's, I can talk about The Last of Us in the same kind of way I could talk about The Seven Samurai, or the same kind of way I could talk about fucking Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, or some novel, or Frankenstein, whatever. Like, those are all require very similar skill sets to at least be able to approach.
The language exists.
The language exists, like the critical terminology, like all that is there. With World of Warcraft, I have no idea how to talk about this game, because again, it is a game I played over the course of years and years and years, played mostly as a social experience. One of the awards I've given it is the My God, the Internet Can Connect People in a Positive Way To award for impossible achievements, because my experience with World of Warcraft was overwhelmingly positive, and I had like a period where it wasn't just friends that I had at school, like I met people online on World of Warcraft and joined guilds and chatted with those people on World of Warcraft for months at a time, and like would come back.
I know someone who met their spouse.
Yeah, exactly. It is,
and it's not a weird thing. It's like, that's cool and I can understand it. I haven't played it, but I totally get it.
It's this truly social experience, and there's something about like, obviously there are a lot of bad actors and bad people on any like big internet thing, but I think Blizzard, I'm sure they've even gotten better at this, but by the time I was playing it, it felt like they had built up the tools so that you could insulate yourself from that if you wanted to, and like if you pick the right server, and they give you like tools for different kinds of servers to avoid too much PvP stuff and people like harassing you online and killing your character a lot, and you could like really sort of cultivate the experience you wanted. And it was for me this very PvE focused thing, and getting on and chatting with my friends and text chat, because again, this is like 2006. I don't think I had my first cell phone by the time I started playing this game for the first time. Like the world was such a different place when I was playing World of Warcraft, and I have such a like incredible amount of nostalgia for that game. Part of that nostalgia also comes from the other award I've given it, the Multitaskers United Medal for Best Podcast Game, because World of Warcraft is one of the reasons why I started listening to podcasts. It is also a huge amount of my favorite music that is like still my favorite music that I listened to the first time playing World of Warcraft, because it is such the perfect multitasker game that I basically listened to like the entire discographies of like Pink Floyd and The Who and the Rolling Stones and like Michael Jackson and Queen and stuff playing World of Warcraft, because there's so many different modes to play that game, and if I was just online and my friends weren't on and it was just me, it's like, okay, I'm gonna like pop in my headphones, and it was on my computer anyway, so it's like just load up iTunes and just play this thing, because again, I didn't have an iPod when I started playing this game. Like, iPods existed, I just didn't have one yet. And so that whole world it's like, again, it is such a place of like deep nostalgia, but it has also created for me, like, I have this incredible respect. I think part of it comes from seeing where the internet has gone for what Blizzard was able to achieve, and like what is a truly singular achievement in World of Warcraft. And it goes so much more beyond like the stuff I do love, like the world design and the character design and the music, and there's something like rhythmic and hypnotic about the MMO style combat that they have, that if you are, you know, doing one of the dungeon raids or something, you have to be incredibly active on. But if you're just doing normal quests, you can like totally lean back and be like, I have my like order of keys, and then like once I initiate combat, I can hit 3 to do this attack, and then 5, and then 1, and then the cooldowns are working out in this way. And you just kind of like come up with this very like satisfying, like very sort of like business, like I have maximized the way I can use this stuff in like a very orderly fashion, and just kind of play this game and kind of zone out and think about things. Is a game that just sort of like was whatever you wanted to make of it at the time. And then it was also a game that allowed you to sort of connect with people and socialize in a period of my life where socializing with people was like very important, being a teenager and all that kind of stuff. And it was also a game that got me like way deeper into PCs and understanding stuff about PCs. It's the first game I ever modded in any way, and so it like I learned a lot about like how to deal with PC games and just like PC software by like going in and changing audio files in World of Warcraft. My favorite mod I had was one where my main character, Danan, was a dwarf hunter. And the reason why I wanted a dwarf hunter was, one, that they get a cool pet, and I wanted a cool bear, and I got a cool bear. I named him Grizzly. He was a bear, and he was cool, and he was my friend, he was my pal. But then you also, if you are a dwarf hunter specifically, you get a blunderbuss rifle instead of a bow and arrow. Every other race, you have like an elf or whatever, you have a bow and arrow. If you're a dwarf, you get this big fucking blunderbuss rifle. And
that's awesome.
It was awesome. The problem is, when you have played this game for years, eventually the sound effect of the giant booming gunshot is so tedious, and I so don't need it anymore, that I went in and I downloaded a mod and installed it by like, again, like basically like, it was more or less like a mod that kind of just replaced some audio files and changed the booming gun sound effect to like, it sounded like a silenced pistol. It was like, there we go, this is perfect. And it was stuff like that. I have so many fond memories of World of Warcraft. Of also, way back when, I think they have changed this now, but one of the main ways you got around in the game was paying griffins, because I was mainly an Alliance player, so playing griffins to fly like you to different like hub points in different major cities and stuff, and you would actually like have to sit there and wait for like 3 minutes and watch the griffin fly around. And so then I downloaded a mod that allowed you to just play Peggle in World of Warcraft, and that's the only way I've ever played Peggle. I played hours of Peggle sitting on fucking griffins or waiting people to group up or whatever in like just go. It was like a little thing I could click up right by my mini map. It would pop out. I would just play Peggle.
That's awesome.
It was great. It's like, and that's like what World of Warcraft, like I say, like it's a game that was whatever you wanted it to be. That's what I meant.
So your number 7 is World of Warcraft /Peggle.
/Peggle, yeah. There's I wouldn't say slash. I think there's like a footnote asterisk.
Okay.
Like also Peggle is a serious contributor to this award also.
Yes. So this is technically 2 games.
It is technically 2 games. So it's technically like a million games, because I played it up to like Cataclysm was like right when I was done. Like Cataclysm was like, and I had like fallen off pretty far. Cataclysm was the one where they like went back to the original stuff and completely reshaped it. I think I had basically been done for several months at that point. And there was like, they did this Cataclysm thing. You got like most of like the basic major stuff that they changed to the world for free in Cataclysm. So it was like, I'll just load it up and check it out and see what the world was. And that was like kind of this like perfect moment also of feeling like I need to walk away from World of Warcraft. A bunch of my friends that I was playing with have kind of like moved on to different places, and they kind of stopped playing this game actively. And that did basically coincide with their big event where they reshaped literally the original Azeroth land and drew the map. Literally, like the regions are different. Like this area that used to be this beautiful forest is now this like wasted volcanic like wasteland. And that was this interesting feeling of that kind of like what was happening in my life and what's happening in the game just sort of merged. And it's like, okay, the world is destroyed, the World of Warcraft is done, and I have to move on.
Have you gone back and played it since then?
No, I've never gone back. But it's a game I have such a deep love and nostalgia and appreciation for. That it just, again, it was one of those games that I think in 2013, because that was a lot closer to when I stopped playing it, I didn't quite appreciate how many fond memories I have of playing that game. And now, with more distance to it, I look back on it as like, those are some good fucking times, man.
Nice. All right. So let's go into our last games for this week, our number 6s. and then we're going to say bye for a week, and then we'll come back and do our top 5. But my number 6 favorite game of all time for this list is Halo Combat Evolved. By the good folks at Bungie, 2001 on the original Xbox, which we can't call the Xbox One anymore because the world is stupid.
It's in the words of Phil Spencer, it is the OG Xbox.
God. Anyway, Halo Combat Evolved is a perfect game. If we're talking about the campaign, even if it's little imperfections, fuck it, it's a perfect game. You know, we just did last year our Let's Play series on Halo Combat Evolved, which I would still recommend you go watch because it was really fun and I worked really hard on it.
Yes.
But
there are some good jokes, particularly I just like 2 months ago, I reloaded up the last episode just to see some of the shit we talk about with Halo the Flood, the novel, because it's very funny.
It is. And, you know, that really cemented that this needed to be on my list, and it needed to be this one. Because there was going to be a Halo on this list. There was always going to be a Halo on this list. Halo is a dead franchise to me in terms of, like, in the year 2018 games coming out.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit. But in its heyday, the Bungie Halo games, Halos 1, 2, 3, Reach, and ODST, are 5 masterful, innovative, amazing campaigns. Some of the best things that have ever been done in the first-person shooter space. I could throw a dart at those 5 games, and I would be happy with whichever one wound up on my list. Yeah. I'd be a little less happy with Halo 2 because I don't really like the campaign, but the multiplayer, I could talk like you are about World of Warcraft with the Halo 2 multiplayer. But I do think in terms of standing the test of time, Halo Combat Evolved, this was proven to me when we did that Let's Play. Because, one, I was on it, watching you play it, talking about it with you, did all of that, and then I had to go in and edit every inch of that footage, and so I basically watched a full playthrough of Halo Combat Evolved twice in a row, which was interesting because I've played that game to completion, 10 times, more than that, like many, many times, right?
Yeah.
But actually just watching it and really studying it in that way you do when you're making a Let's Play like that, it's clear to me that I think that game is not just a masterpiece of its time, for its time, but for all time, with lessons that continue to be relevant, and in some ways more so than any other Halo game in terms of just how much good, solid, interesting game design there is, narrative design there is, the way they lay out lore into the world, that Halo is not a game that ever really needs to stop for exposition. There's the one cutscene in the middle with Cortana and 343 Guilty Spark, but other than that, it can just move and introduce you to this world. Very much the equivalent of like the original Star Wars or something, where it gets to tell a story with a really cool beginning, middle, and end, but also introduce you to this much larger world in the most interesting ways. And as a first-person shooter campaign, something which is, I would say, a troubled genre in some ways. It can be good, it can be really bad when it's bad, or just really boring and lazy like a lot of Call of Duty campaigns. But Halo Combat Evolved, every level feels significant and meaty and different, even levels that you're going backwards through a different level, like 2 Betrayals versus Truth and Reconciliation,
right, yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Those two feel so significantly different from one another, even though you're going back through a lot of the same spaces. And that's a fascinating part of this game to me. It all feels so good to play. It because it was a truly like generational shift of like creating a first-person shooter that can work on a console. They weren't playing by anyone else's rules. They could do whatever they wanted. So there's a bunch of things in Halo 1 that you go back to today and you're like, no one would do that today. Mm-hmm. Like the pistol, or the shotgun, or the crazy balance things that didn't really work when you went into the multiplayer side of things. But for the campaign, we need more of that. We need more of that kind of just throw caution to the wind creativity in game design. I do think the game most heavily influenced by Combat Evolved, since Combat Evolved, might be Doom 2016. In a lot of ways.
I can see a lot of that.
Yeah, like, obviously Doom 2016's primary influence is Doom.
Yes.
But I do think, like, in terms of how it structures levels and how it isn't afraid to, as I said, throw caution to the wind with weapons, really make scenarios feel big and meaty and satisfying to play through, even in just, limited chunks, like one level at a time. I think a lot of that feels like Combat Evolved, and it's something that I don't think the Halo games ever necessarily really lost, because Halo 3 does this, Halo Reach does this, ODST definitely does this in terms of that significance. But I think the genre for a while absolutely lost sight of that, because when Call of Duty became I don't mean to just beat up on Call of Duty all the time, but it's an easy target.
Yeah.
When Call of Duty really became the dominant thing, I think there was a dominant trend in first-person shooter design that was really boring, which was run down a corridor, the scenery does not matter, the enemy types do not matter, the gun you have doesn't really matter, it's just mindless. And Halo is many things, but it is not mindless. And I think that's one of the most important things about it and its design and what it has contributed to the genre. And something that, there's a soul and a texture and a significance to playing a Halo game, especially a classic Halo, a Bungie Halo game, that when you compare it to Bungie's current creation, Destiny is a wildly accomplished series in so many ways. It's beautiful, it plays well, it's got good music, it's fun, but I don't feel that. It's a game I look at and I play and I enjoy, and then I forget it exists when I look away from it. You can't do that with Halo. It's seared into my memory, and some of that is nostalgia, obviously. Halo is a really formative thing for me. I remember every detail of booting up Combat Evolved for the first time and seeing that first level on the Pillar of Autumn. It was not the first Halo game I played was Halo 2 with a cousin on his Xbox, and I remember that very vividly as well also. But I do think it's because Halo seared into my brain then and has stayed there over time, and not all games do. Sonic Adventure 2 is a game that was very important to me and I love, and I'm not going to say I don't love it, but if I go back and play it today, it does not feel vitally important to the gaming landscape the way Halo Combat Evolved does.
I don't know, the Chow Garden's still pretty good.
It's still pretty great, but it's one part of the game.
Yeah.
So, when considering this, there are some on here where I really struggled with which game from a franchise was I going to choose to represent that franchise. Halo is not one of those. I think Combat Evolved is one that, more than any other, so clearly stands the test of time. It's also because it's a less multiplayer-heavy title. You don't need to experience that to get why it's great. The campaign does everything you need. Obviously, I do miss a little bit here of being able to talk about Halo multiplayer, which is great and important and significant to me, but is more rooted in the past than the present to me. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying, your World of Warcraft thing is, wrong because you don't play it anymore. That's not what I mean. It's just, for me, it's it doesn't feel like what I want to put on the list. Because I have lots of fond memories with the other Halo games. But I think especially because of that Let's Play we did, Combat Evolved it's a game that means a lot to me personally and in my life, but also I'll play it any day of the week. You put Halo Combat Evolved in front of me, I'll play that fucking game right now. It's great. I don't know if I have a ton more to say about it because we do have 10 hours of content on it, and I think we said a lot of what needs to be. I mean, we basically did an audio commentary on the game.
Yeah.
So you should go watch that. It's a lot of fun. But Halo Combat Evolved is at least my 6th favorite game for the purposes of this list.
I cannot argue with that choice.
Okay.
It is a fucking amazing video game. Yeah.
So what's the last game we're talking about today, Sean?
The last game we're talking about is the game that I had the hardest time by far figuring out what to do with on my list, because it came down to me having this revelation of it's not just that I can't have one game, I can only have one game from one franchise. It was I can only have one game from each studio, and this split fucking ripped me apart. I'm glad so much, Jonathan, that you picked Mass Effect, because my number 6 game is Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic.
So we almost didn't talk about Mass Effect on this if I hadn't put it on it.
I mean, we would have talked about it because in many ways, even though it's not literally part of the same franchise for me experientially, Mass Effect was the successor to Knights of the Old Republic. Because for those who don't know, BioWare made both of these. Knights of the Old Republic is you talked about an OG Xbox game. I'm talking about also an OG Xbox game. Knights of the Old Republic came out on the original Xbox July 15th, 2003. I didn't get it until that, I think it probably would have been October or November. And this game was so hugely formative to me in a similar way that Halo Combat Evolved was. This was the first RPG I played that I really, really fell in love with, and I have replayed this game, other than something that's really easy to replay, like Halo. Like anything that's like a very meaty, like over like 12, 20 hour long game. Knights of the Old Republic is easily the game I replayed the most. Like I've played this game probably 5+ times all the way through since like in those like 15 years since this game came out. And part of that is, and part of the reason why I kind of picked it over Mass Effect is there's definitely a nostalgia component to it. There was a meme hedging my bets and be like, Jonathan's definitely going to put Mass Effect on his list, so I can just kind of put it there. And like you deal with that one. But then also there is a sort of game design component of the Knights of the Old Republic that I legitimately just prefer and love more than like playing the Mass Effect games. For me, the Mass Effect games, even though I enjoy a lot of the combat in Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3, and I love how broken the combat is in Mass Effect 1 when you do the New Game Plus, and you have all the powers, and you just walk into a scenario and put up the fucking like pop-up menu and just be like, and you get a black hole, and you explode into nothing, and you're gonna fly in outer space, and you're gonna get crushed into a little, it's just, everybody dies immediately, because you just, if people want to have fun playing Mass Effect 1, go do New Game Plus and just pick someone who is a biotic and get Liara and Tali, because they have all the special powers, and just use a special wheel and you never have to worry about that game. And so the combat's fun in that way for that game. But in Knights of the Old Republic, I have given it this award for specifically this. It is the perfect blend of RPG and action, and I give it the Goldilocks distinction for being not too RPG-y, not too action-y, but just right. Because it comes from the like traditional BioWare RPG sort of foundation, which is their Baldur's Gate games, which are like literally built out of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Like it is, if you play Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and a lot of games from that period, you are either playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons or Dungeons and Dragons 3rd Edition. And the games are, that's not me saying they are like riffing off of those like concepts and Thaco and like all that shit. No, I mean it is literally that rule set. They just programmed that rule set, and that is what the combat is. And KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic, is the exact same way. I think it's 3rd Edition Dungeons and Dragons, and obviously like adapted heavily to have Star Wars shit in it, like force powers instead of magic. But it is like at its core, the foundation of the games, like the bones of the game, come from pen and paper RPGs, and you can so feel that in how you play the game. But it's not traditionally turn-based. It has this weird, like, if you sort of like stripped away the graphics and everything, it is turn-based under the hood. But the way they present it to you is more real time, and you can pause the action whenever you want. But like you are picking actions, and your character kind of does it. And this is interesting blend of sort of like tactical Dungeons and Dragons kind of turn-based combat with this shell of like a cinematic live action shit. So you don't just have, two people standing across a spaceship, and you pick attack, and one of them walks forward and just like swings a sword. And it's like, and you do 16 damage. You actually see like you pull out your lightsabers, and you go up to like the Dark Jedi, and you like actually clash lightsabers, and the sound effects play, and the music swells. And so it has the cinematic component you want from a game like that, but its gameplay foundations have the kind of depth and versatility of its pen and paper roots. And there's something about that I love so much, and I think that's the reason why I have replayed this one so many times, because it's also like me saying I've like replayed it 5+ times, is that's me just saying the times I've replayed it and finished the game. I couldn't even possibly count the number of times I have booted up Knights of the Old Republic and played like the first 5 hours or so with a new character, trying out like, what if I did this? What if I made this kind of character? Because you have so many different configurations of the kind of class you make, like paired with the Jedi character, because once you get to Dantooine, like 5-6 hours into the game, that's when you can become a Jedi, so you can mix and match. I want to be like a soldier with a Jedi consular that focuses more on Jedi powers, and you can kind of blend things interestingly that way. Of course, also it has the like kind of traditional Star Wars light side, dark side split, where you can either be like a saint, or you can go and you can walk into a scenario that would be very easy to defuse, and instead you can just make everybody in this room kill everybody else, even though they don't actually want to. And that it is very fun to play the game both ways, I can confirm. And so that element of it, that dynamic, is something that is so rich to me that Mass Effect, as incredible as Mass Effect is, and if you sat down in front of me and you said, I have the Mass Effect trilogy of games, and I have the Knights of the Old Republic games, and I've never played either of these, and you asked me which one you should play, like, unless you're a weirdo, I would always say you should play the Mass Effect games. I think in a lot of ways the Mass Effect games are better, but for me personally, there is something so incredible about that RPG foundation that KOTOR has that I could never escape from it. Like, I replayed this game kind of on clockwork every 3 years or so.
Sean, I have to tell you, I had no doubt that KOTOR was going to be on your list.
Really?
No, you talk about it all the time.
That's true.
It is fundamental to your entire outlook on video games.
Yeah.
You mention it not just in Star Wars. I mean, you've had a lot of room to talk about it recently because Star Wars is everywhere. But like you mention it all the time. I never doubted that KOTOR was going to be on your list. I'm actually a little surprised you were that tortured over it.
I mean, but it's something. I think it's part of it is it's specifically. And I'll probably talk about it once we get to like honorable mentions, but like because I do want to talk about the ending of Mass Effect 3 more specifically from my perspective 5 years later, and that was almost the strongest argument I wanted for Mass Effect was like I really just want to talk about Mass Effect 3 again, but I couldn't let that win over. But
the point of this list is we're assembling a personal canon, right?
Yes.
Like what are not just 10 favorite, but I think contained in that is like what are the 10 that like shape all of your outlook on this medium when you go to play like a new game or something.
Yeah.
And you can love Mass Effect, but I would say for you, KOTOR has to be more key to that canon than Mass Effect.
It definitely is. And another part of it is you cannot talk about KOTOR without talking about the Star Wars element. And I have given the other award I have given it is the Ryan Johnson presents the Can't We All Just Love Star Wars award and get along for best Star Wars game ever.
I don't think Ryan Johnson would make it to the stage, sadly.
He would in my conference, where we're only letting the good people in. There's people who like KOTOR, and they like Clone Wars, and they like the good Star Wars movies, which is almost all of them except for like Rogue One, and Solo's okay. We can let Solo in at like the door. They can stand at the door. That's fine.
Solo could be the bouncer.
Yeah, Solo is the bouncer. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and I've talked about this a bunch. We probably talked about it at some point on one of the fucking like billion Star Wars podcasts we've made in the past 2 years. But like a huge foundation of my love for Star Wars does come from KOTOR. Like I had already seen the movies and really loved the movies before this point. Like, this is post episode 1. It's also post episode 2, 2003, right? That's 2002.
2002 is episode.
Yeah, episode 2. So the prequels were in full swing at this point, but this was pre me playing like other Star Wars games. It was pre me reading Star Wars comic books. It was pre me like reading any Star Wars novels.
Man, during the last Star Wars trilogy, we got KOTOR. During this Star Wars trilogy, we get fucking Battlefront bullshit.
I mean, in the last Star Wars trilogy, we also got Battlefront 1 and 2. In this Star Wars trilogy, we got the bad Battlefront 1 and 2.
We've really gotten screwed this time around.
Yeah, Star Wars it's a weird, tumultuous, tempestuous franchise in a lot of ways. But for me, KOTOR opened so many doors of like, oh, fuck, this is what Star Wars can be. And so much of that is about the setting and the world building and the BioWare storytelling. And there's so many like side quests and missions and little like pieces of dialogue and stuff in KOTOR that are just ingrained in my head. One of my favorites is when you're on Dantooine and you're like still doing your sort of like Jedi trials to be able to become a proper Jedi Knight before you go out and like the game kind of fully opens up. You can do this one side quest where a Jedi Master is kind of like dealing with this dispute. It's not really a dispute. It's more like someone has been murdered. Very clearly, there's a dead body on the ground, and there are multiple parties kind of involved. The person who found the body, and his wife, and this other guy who's there, and this Jedi Master is kind of like dealing with this, and you stumble upon the scene, and he's like, "Oh, you're a Padawan, like you're training. Like here, you handle this." And I'll stand back and watch and kind of like give some advice, but you solve this murder. And it is just this one, like, there's no other side quest like it in the game where you just walk around in this little field where he has like assembled all the witnesses and like people of interest of this case, and you talk to them. And it's basically like fucking LA Noire or something in Star Wars where you just like, okay, like this is your story. This is your story. Oh, this person told me this. So I'm going to like then be like, oh no, like what you're saying is bullshit. Like this person said they saw you at this point in time. And then there's also a droid there that you can ask for, like, okay, you're analyzing the blood sample, and there's this whole component of like, oh, this person said that they were like hunting early in the morning and like the glare hit their eyes and they didn't know what they were firing at and accidentally shot this dude. But then you're like, but no, actually, according to the weather report from this droid, at the point in time when you're telling the glare was in your eyes, it was actually stormy and cloudy, not like it's bright right now in the morning. It was overcast. It's like, so you're talking about it is like slowly deconstructing like this like whole thing where there is like, I think he like cheated this guy out of business, and that guy was like cheating with his wife, and this whole like weird sort of like web of different people involved, and you sit there and you just solve the case, and that side quest is so burned in my memory. It's so distinctive and interesting and compelling and so completely unique. The other part of the game that's one of my favorite parts, and this is the part I think very specifically that made me like really deeply reconsider my relationship to Star Wars and like as a franchise and as like a narrative world, and it's the part of KOTOR that really frustrates me about the way that people, I think, kind of put down the original game and kind of like try to elevate KOTOR 2 as being like more mature, because it's like KOTOR 2 has all this like pseudo-philosophical kind of bullshit, and my patience for KOTOR 2 has really kind of like devolved over the years. Of I respected it a lot when it came out, even though like it was like technically a mess, but that wasn't really the game's fault, that was the publisher's fault. But over the years, like when I kind of go back to KOTOR 2 and deal with it, the character of Kreia, who's this sort of like old crone that's kind of like manipulating you and telling you all this like kind of philosophical stuff about the Force, has less sound, and I feel like it's like as I become less and less 14 years old, it's
right.
like that becomes less and less compelling to me. I'm like, no, this is actually kind of bullshit and dumb and kind of goes nowhere and says nothing ultimately, and is like quote unquote deconstructing Star Wars, but I don't think it's really doing a great job at it. And Knights of the Old Republic kind of gets put down because it is very earnestly Star Wars, and it's not trying to avoid the more like kind of black and white, good and evil aspects of Star Wars that people in our culture like try to avoid in storytelling. But there is stuff in KOTOR that has this subtlety and nuance to it that I find so powerful, in that it being an expanded universe thing that is able to spend a lot of time in this universe, gets to explore facets of the Star Wars universe with a lot more depth than you would normally be able to encounter. And the best example of that I have is everything related to the Korriban section, where when you go to the planet Korriban to try to find the star map, because the main plot of the game is you reconstructed the star map that has been split across 4 different planets so you can find where this ancient artifact is. And one of the planets you have to go to Korriban is a Sith homeworld where there's a Sith academy training Sith and like Dark Jedi on it. And you have to infiltrate that and find out where it is. And so where the star map is, and so you have this like dark reflection of everything you did on Dantooine at the Jedi Academy, learning how to be a Jedi, and you see it from the perspective of the Sith. And that, while you like, there's definitely a like the Jedi are better than the Sith, which the Jedi are better than the Sith. There is a lot of nuance in you just like seeing both sides of the equation and seeing the perspectives, and that the Jedi, I don't want to go like be all both sidesy on it, but the Jedi have a lot of flaws and a lot of bullshit. We talked about that a lot in the prequels, and again, this is coming out like in the middle of the prequel stuff. A lot of that I feel like influenced the way that this game portrays the Jedi. But then the Sith have a perspective that is weirdly compelling, and I think like actually maybe in like a personal, real world sense is a little bit better. And so KOTOR has these 2 codes, the Jedi code and the Sith code. I'm just going to read both of them. And you tell me which one sounds like something like you would more want to live by. The Jedi code is, there is no emotion, there's peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. Which sounds very nice, but it's also like, there's
terrifying, I think.
There's no emotion. Oh, okay. There's no passion. Well, that doesn't sound great. Like, no ignorance, but there is knowledge. That's okay. I could get behind that. There's no death. There's the Force. I can kind of get with that. But it's a very cold, and it's like you can very much see like the prequel Jedi Order in that code. Then there's the Sith code, which is just so much better, even just from like a poetic perspective. It's just so much better written, which I think is very appropriate for the Sith. Peace is a lie. There's only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall set me free.
Wow, you just read the GOP party platform.
Yes.
Sorry.
But it's so much more poetically written, which is a little element of it I love so much, of like it has this progression and evolution. It's not just totally repetitive.
The Sith are seductive. They have to be.
The Sith are seductive, and there is something about their philosophy, and it's explored pretty in depth when you do the Sith Academy stuff, of you seeing like, well, yes, like the way what they go for so far, and they kind of destroy it, and it's very like objectivist and like Ayn Randian in a lot of ways. But a part of like that Randian thing is that like there is some truth in what you're saying, is that like there is such a focus on the self and self-improvement and like selfishness in a different perspective, that is like the Jedi code is in many ways just as untenable as the Sith code, because true selflessness is self-destruction and is not like really appropriate, and not like something I would want to like teach people. And I feel like in like we have had this moment of like realizing like the importance of self-care and like mental health care and all that kind of stuff, of like you need to take care of yourself like first. Like you put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help your kids. And true selflessness is you put the fucking mask on the kid first and fuck everything up, right? And that's like true selflessness in that sense is not necessarily a virtue; it can be a vice. And so the Sith code having some of like obviously they go way too far and becomes about like murdering people so you can become more powerful, and that's bad shit. But there is like self-improvement is a good thing, and people should improve themselves and expand their boundaries and like really focus on themselves and like value and treasure themselves in a way that the Sith find very appropriate. And there's something about like you having like just legitimately just like go through these quest lines and kind of like, because when you're in the Jedi Order, you kind of just want to like, okay, I'm going to do what you tell me unless I'm doing dark side, and then you're going to tell me to do something I'm good. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to murder everybody involved. When you're at the Sith Academy, since you're undercover, it's this whole kind of undercover cop thing of like you can kind of like work behind the scenes to be like, oh, instead I'm going to like get this person out of here instead of killing them or something. But you have to play along with the Sith instructors, or you cannot complete these quests. And so you have to like kind of see things from their point of view. And that element of the game, I think, has always had way more... There's a lot more subtlety there than people, I think, give Knights of the Old Republic credit for. And I think that's true about so much of its storytelling that people kind of take for granted a little bit and get too focused on the sexiness of KOTOR 2 and like it's dark and all that ingredient and the deconstruction and all that stuff. It's kind of how I feel about the split between Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. They're both great games, but I think people undervalue the earnestness of like straightforward storytelling and overprize like the kind of subversive kind of thing that oftentimes is subversive in a way that doesn't even really help its ultimate goals.
Yeah, I agree with that. We'll talk about that more later,
yeah.
But yes.
But Knights of the Old Republic, incredible game. People should play it. I think it still holds up. Like, I think obviously, if you don't have the nostalgia for it, there are some bad like borders before you get into it. Jonathan, you should finally just play this game. I would love.
I have a version that I would prefer to play now, which is that Xbox one, because I can just use a controller and it's on my TV and it looks nice. So that's the version I know I will play at some point.
Yes.
But yes.
Also, the best thing, I think I talked about this when you said you were going to try to play Knights of the Old Republic. The best thing about Knights of the Old Republic is when you are just walking around in the world, not in combat, and you press the Y button, he spins his lightsabers around. It's very cool.
Nice. I'll just throw in an honorable mention here while we're talking about Star Wars games. I think Super Star Wars is a really cool game.
Super Star Wars
if
is
you've never
game.
played it,
yeah.
The Super Star Wars trilogy, Super Star Wars 1, you can get on PS4 and Vita. It's a Super NES game, and it's fucking great. And it's like the best way to play a video game version of A New Hope or then Empire and Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
And because KOTOR is its own thing.
Yes.
But sometimes the best kind of movie video game is just 16-bit awesomeness.
Yeah, you're like, you kind of squint and like, I guess it looks like Mark Hamill. Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, Sean, this was fun. This was podcast 250.
Yes.
So here's to 7 or 8 more of these.
Well, there's at least going to be one more.
There's at least going to be one more. So 251, we will be back next week. We will finish counting down with numbers 5 through 1, and we hope to see you there.
There might be some surprises. Who knows?